For well over a century and a half now, Riverside Park in the New England town of Agawam, Massachusetts has been a famous family destination and a place that lends itself to a rich, steep history of fun and excitement. And although the park has gone through multiple reincarnations within its long history, the one thing that has stayed the same is its ability to be a thrilling, entertaining, and sometimes relaxing destination for the many generations of park guests who have visited throughout the years. Although not always known as Riverside Park, through its several name changes, it has taken on many historic milestones that we will highlight throughout this program, from a picnic grove that dates back to the mid-1800s to the mid-century modern decor of a technologic theme park that it eventually became. We will explore all things Riverside and even see what the park has transformed into today. So join me as we get ready to take a chronological look and explore its history as a picnic grove, an amusement park with a famous speedway that transformed to a theme park-oriented destination that provided an era of Disney-like attractions and so much more. It's all here on this episode of Bry Adventures, the History of Riverside Park. I'm Brian Armand, and like you, I enjoy a good adventure. Fun, fantastic, and magical journeys await. So sit back as I take a new excursion forward on this episode of Bry Adventures. As I started my research into this parcel of land that resides along the Connecticut River, I began to realize more and more just how beloved this park was, even before it became Riverside the Amusement Park. Throughout its history, the park has seen several changes in name, ownership, and forms of entertainment offerings. However, throughout all these changes, one thing that has remained the same is the park's ability to be a driving force for family fun and entertainment in some form or another over the course of many years and several centuries to come. People came from all around in various modes of transportation throughout the years to visit this place of social gathering, and one thing the park did exceptionally well was to create a place over time that could cater to the many likes of many people. Gone are the original picnic groves that had been a popular destination for many years. Gone is the famous roller skating rink that allowed for skaters to come together and share a favorite pastime. And gone is the era of the dancing pavilion down by the river. These physical and tangible pieces of the past may be gone, however, they are not forgotten, and they live on through fond memories of the various eras of Riverside Park's history. As we explore Riverside's origins in this documentary, we will touch upon some of its key historic moments in time. A more in-depth, greatly detailed look into Riverside's rich history of events can be found in local historian author David Checky's book, Images of America, Riverside Park. The book itself features very interesting, in-depth historic recollections and statistics of events throughout Riverside's years, and it's filled with great pictures, memorabilia, and detailed information of Riverside throughout the years. We like to take a moment and note that expansions, revisions, new ride additions, as well as ride closures are all a common and constant ongoing thing at theme parks. What we mention here might change over time for whatever reason going forward. For this reason, the information provided in this visual representation acts only as documentation of the park's historic past along with some of its present-day happenings to help tell a complete story. Here, along the Connecticut River, resides this spacious piece of land. Although mostly a forest lined with pine and other types of trees and vegetation, it will eventually become home to Riverside Park. However, that is still many years away. The Connecticut River is a 410-mile stretch waterway that flows through 4 states. From the northern tip of New Hampshire, it flows down through Vermont, Massachusetts, and finally into Connecticut, emptying out into Long Island Sound. With that great distance comes many great things to see. From the numerous roadside attractions to the historic curiosities, the river lends itself to so many great stories to tell, and one of those stories is here, in Agawam, Massachusetts. In this vast forest of trees, although a very picturesque and serene place, there's not much here. Well, not yet anyway. However, if you get the chance to walk through this tranquil area along the Connecticut River, you'll be amongst the birds and other wildlife that reside in these parts. Perhaps a small trail will lead you further into the tall pine trees and other vegetation that fill out this area. The sun rays filter in through the treetops, creating a spectacular visual, and at last you reach the river. This is probably what you would have encountered prior to the first real use of this land as a destination. Eventually, with a mill occupying a portion of the land, another section near the river lends itself to a picnic area. It becomes a popular destination for family gatherings and a place to relax, perhaps on one of those several park benches that begin to emerge, or just by taking a stroll through its wooded area down by the riverbanks. Eventually, over the next several years, as the area expands, more people will start to gather here. With more interest in this destination comes more things to do. Eventually, the sounds of laughter and excitement fill the air. The sounds of families enjoying time together, perhaps swinging on a swing set that once stood here, or visiting one of the various concessions and pavilions that will soon make their home here. As things begin to evolve, this one-time forest of trees by the river will keep moving forward into the 20th century, and again into the 21st century, developing more attractions, more amusements, and of course, more families to enjoy it all. For now though, as the trees' filtered sun rays continue to grace the grounds of this area, this parcel of land that resides here within the 19th century owes itself to a wooded wonderland for people to enjoy in some of its most basic natural elements. Soon, down by the river, steamboats will be docking here, and the sounds of people embarking on a day of adventure will become the norm. After several years serving as picnic grounds, this area would eventually become formally known as Gallup's Grove. John Gallup, who had purchased the land back in 1857, opened Gallup's Grove in 1870. He also had his own steamboats which allowed transportation of his guests to and from the grove via the Connecticut River. Steamboats were a common mode of transportation to this area for many years to follow, and the relaxing ride on one of these boats was just as much a part of the fun as a day out on Gallup's Grove would be. People could now enjoy the river and the land, and as word got out of this special destination, it became a popular hotspot. In 1887, the grove was sold to Henry Smith and his son. Smith renamed the property Riverside Grove. Throughout its time as Riverside Grove, the property saw many new and exciting things to see and do. More concession, refreshment stands, pavilions, and a restaurant, amongst other things, were eventually constructed within this wooded area. The first merry-go-round on the property was installed sometime around 1888. Riverside Grove became especially popular for its clam bakes. This social gathering of sorts delighted guests for years and years to come. With all these new amusements and attractions, attendance at the Grove was increasing, and so was the transportation to get these crowds to the Grove. The need for larger steamboats became a necessity. Several steamboats were utilized during these times. One of them was named the Mascot, which was a 78-foot double-deck steamer. Years later, the Grove steamboats were once again lacking in capacity with the influx of passengers, and the need for a much larger boat once again would be in order. In 1900, the 92-foot Sylvia steamboat set sail, this time handling a capacity of 350 passengers. Around the same time, the Springfield Street Railway's trolley line was constructed. Riverside Grove, which found itself at the end of the line, ushered passengers to and from the park regularly. Passengers of the trolley could get off and eventually enter Riverside Grove from its front entrance and enjoy a day at the Grove. Riverside itself was not built or owned by the railway and was not considered to be a true trolley park by definition. The Smiths, who owned Riverside Grove, sold the property to Henry J. Perkins in 1911, and in 1912, Perkins opened the property back up as Riverside Park. If previous years were any indication of the growth to what was once just a modest picnic area, then the Riverside Park era would be where its history would begin to shine even brighter than it had before. The picnic grove that it had started out as was now becoming more of a destination where one could experience themed amusements and would begin to start the era in Riverside's history as the early beginnings of its amusement park origins. A sign of the times can be seen in this picture. Notice the men and women's fancy style of dress, and furthermore, notice the abundance of men wearing dress hats. This was a common way to dress and come out to the park in those early days. Contrast that to how we dress today when going to a theme park. Comfortable and casual wear is the norm. However, getting dressed up back in those days for a day out in the park was pretty standard fare. Continuing in its tradition of hosting its famous clam bakes, Riverside Park would expand its dining capacity and also at this time add a new dance hall and other improvements around the property. However, the expansions didn't stop there. As more people began driving in this new era of the automobile, Perkins added a new parking lot for those who arrived by this form of transportation. Riverside's entrance went through several changes over the years. These pictures show how the early entrance around 1912 or so that guests would have taken into the park. Here, we can see the giant dip coaster that guests themselves saw as soon as they entered down the entrance path. And speaking of the giant dip, it opened to the public in 1912 as the park's first roller coaster. It became a park favorite for all those who experienced it. Several years later, with the giant dip's popularity amongst guests, a new coaster, the Greyhound, was constructed, and in 1915, this 80-foot high coaster, which was noted as being one of the largest and fastest coasters in New England, was open. Years later, in 1920, the giant dip coaster was replaced with a new and bigger coaster called the Lightning. This coaster was double in size compared to the giant dip, and was considered the largest coaster in the country, traveling 1 mile around. Some notable and interesting attractions to mention around this time begin with the 1913 opening of the Panama Canal ride. The real Panama Canal itself would open in 1914, so this ride based on the real thing in 1913 would give park guests some insight and education on it. Today, rides of this nature would be considered somewhat of edutainment, that is, providing entertainment with an educational element, and from all accounts, the Panama Canal ride delivered this. Local historian and author David Checke explains the significance of this ride and its later transformation. The following is a quote from David sent to me during some of my research I had been preparing for this documentary. David writes, "In the span of less than a decade, the Panama Canal ride opens in 1913 to exploit the public's interest in the engineering marvel then under construction. The ride is reworked into the Mountain Torrent in 1915 after the canal opens and public interest wanes. In 1920, the ride is again transformed into the Coal Mine ride. The Panama Canal and Mountain Torrent rides were indoor water rides. The Coal Mine ride utilized donkeys pulling visitors in coal cars." End quote. Other attractions that would become very popular with park guests were the addition of a roller skating rink and in 1917 a giant swimming pool. Both the skating rink and the swimming pool proved to be very popular with park guests. As for the addition of the swimming pool, this was no ordinary pool. In fact, it was considered to be one of the largest artificial natatoriums in the country, and for good reason. The pool measured in at 300 feet in diameter and 1,000 feet around. As advertised, the pool would have 3,000 gallons of water pumped in and out per minute. Shortly after it had opened, the pool was named Lake Take-A-Dip. Advertisements encouraged park guests to come on down and, well, take a dip. A man-made lake-type setting would emerge, complete with bathhouses and sandy beach-like areas around the pool to give swimmers a place to lounge around in the summer sun. It should also be noted here, the pool was advertised as being one of the cleanest around, and the park's owners made sure to prove that this was the case on occasion. The pool also featured a very unique centerpiece, a giant diving platform. This diving platform sat in the center of the pool and allowed swimmers to dive into 11 feet of water, which was the deepest section of the pool within the inside area. The diving platform also had a tall pole with some ornate lighting atop. Some years later, the pool was eventually filled in and became a parking lot. However, the diving platform and its light pole from 1917 remained. The ornate lighting that once sat atop the tall pole in the early 1900s had long been changed out and replaced with more modern flood-style type lighting, serving as a parking lot light of sorts. Many people who would walk or drive by it really had no idea to what it was, other than just a parking lot light with an odd round base. What's even more amazing is what could faintly be seen in the photo dated back to early 1983. If you look closely, you would be able to barely see a sign reading depth 11 feet, the actual depth of the center of Lake Take-A-Dip. Many who had walked or drove past this pool in the parking lot in more recent times probably never saw this sign underneath, and if they did, it would probably be even more of a mystery as to just what this pool was, and not knowing that a huge pool once graced the area which had eventually become this giant parking lot. The diving platform and its tall light pole actually remained well into the 1990s, and could even be seen past the mid-90s on Google Maps. Whether it be foreshadowing or just a coincidence, the area of the parking lot where the diving platform stood would once again be claimed by a water-type attraction in the late 1990s. This time in the form of a giant water park expansion, though the diving platform and light pole would not survive within the new water park, and instead was finally taken down after some 80 years in the same place. Speaking of diving, we'll dive a bit more into the water park expansion a little later on within this documentary. Another upgrade to the park that also came in 1917 was a new dance space called Cook's Dancing Pavilion. This large dance hall, in fact the largest in New England at its time, had become a very popular attraction amongst park guests. Although there had been entertainment prior to the opening of Cook's, the new Cook's Pavilion expanded upon the older open-air dance floor space to create a more enclosed atmosphere for both the entertainment and dancers alike. Many orchestra concerts and famous musicians were featured here throughout the years. As the 1920s moved forward, Riverside Park was really becoming a destination that included a little bit of everything for everyone who would frequent its property. The park continued to see new attractions and amusements added, and the park and its various owners over the years enjoyed many successful moments in time that they could marvel in. As the making of this documentary, Riverside, in its various incarnations, has provided park guests with over a century and a half of entertainment. For almost 90 of those years, it was known by the name Riverside Park, and would further grow and prosper until the end of the 1920s when the stock market crash of '29 turned a once flourishing park into the decline it would soon endure in the several years to follow. The 1930s were not kind to Riverside Park. It was almost like everything the park had going for it was now just a vision of the past, and a new set of hardships began to plague the park. Financial and other troubles would begin to wreak havoc along with additional struggles occurring within the 1930s decade. Other than the occasional company picnic, Riverside as a destination park remained closed to the public. From the mid to late 1930s, Riverside continued falling on hard times, and the park overall was spiraling into disrepair. After the many attempts to get it up and running again, it wasn't until a man by the name of Edward Carroll Sr. came to the park's rescue and saved it from its doom and gloom that it had been steeped in for many years prior. Mr. Carroll's purchase of Riverside from this point in the park's history would prove to be just what it needed to once again be a popular staple entertainment destination. In the 1930s, a couple of years prior to purchasing the park, Mr. Carroll was managing the drive-in theater that resided on Riverside's parking lot. The drive-in, known as the Riverside Park-In, was the first drive-in within western Massachusetts. The Park-In name seemed to be a great play on words. It really was the only thing that Riverside had as an attraction prior to Mr. Carroll purchasing the park. With the condition of the park continuing to deteriorate, coupled with aging attractions that were still left up, the park's destiny was in question as nature began to take over the grounds and its future was still uncertain. With all the uncertainty surrounding Riverside, Mr. Carroll saw what could be a bright future for the park, and on May 29, 1940, Riverside Park would once open again to the public. Mr. Carroll had big plans to take the park's future into something that was bigger, better, and bolder than anything that had been on its grounds in the past. For anyone who attended Riverside Park under Carroll's ownership, they would know that what they saw and experienced as a park guest was testament to Mr. Carroll's word on delivering top-notch entertainment at every corner. Upgrades to the new amusements were part of this new era of Riverside Park. Mr. Carroll always seemed to give it his all whenever possible. One example of the ongoing improvements was the roller skating rink. It was given new upgrades and continued to be a popular attraction to guests. The roller rink, seen here, was located at the front of the park right next to the front entrance. Opening with the park in 1940 was the 1909 Ilions Carousel that Mr. Carroll had purchased. This was no ordinary carousel, and in fact, some one-of-a-kind features reside on it. Marcus Charles Ilions, or MC Ilions as he's sometimes known by, worked as a wooden carousel carver. In 1909, he opened up shop as MC Ilions & Sons Carousel Works. Some of his best work could be seen on his carousels, and Riverside had one. The carousel, along with many other rides, attractions, and historic happenings at the park, have very interesting backstories, and a lot of firsts and one-of-a-kinds and things of that nature have graced Riverside's deep history. 1941 saw a landmark attraction arrive at Riverside. Riverside Park opened up its first roller coaster under the new ownership of Mr. Carroll, known as the Cyclone. Mr. Carroll had been inspired by and purchased the plans and other elements for his coaster from the 1939's New York World's Fair. On a side note, this Cyclone roller coaster was not the same one that would eventually open at the park in 1983, and in fact, this Cyclone coaster would eventually be renamed Thunderbolt. 1941 was also the year Riverside introduced the popular dark ride Laugh in the Dark. This attraction thrilled many park guests who experienced it and remained at the park for several decades right up until the 1970s and 80s. With each passing year, Edward Carroll Sr. would advertise a new ride or attraction, building upon the great array of attractions already making themselves at home in the park. Riverside Park was not just your average amusement park tucked away in the distance. Rather, it stood out in the forefront. It was big and bold, top entertainment, rides, and attractions were part of its success. The birth of an elaborate theme park was starting to blossom, and Ed Carroll Sr. was the man at the helm. Ed Carroll's vision of expanding the park year after year saw another big change in 1948, when the large dance hall down by the Connecticut River was removed to make way for another big attraction. With the dance hall gone, the Riverside Park Speedway was built. The Speedway would prove to be very, very popular amongst park guests through its years at the park. A 3,000-seat stadium and racetrack with views of the Connecticut River behind it was now part of Riverside Park's list of ever-growing attractions. Stock car races, demolition derbies, and more were featured at the Speedway, and in later years, NASCAR had also become part of the Speedway's offerings, holding several events down at the track. The Speedway was not just limited to racing. Eventually, throughout the years, the Carrolls made great use of it when races were not going on. Much like the dance hall did years earlier, the Speedway was used as an enormous concert venue. Concert goers would line up for hours at the Speedway's gates to try to get to the actual paved racetrack down by the river just for an up-close concert experience. Celebrity entertainment was a big draw to Riverside Park, and Ed Carroll knew just how to bring in the acts, straight from Hollywood. From movies to music, the latest and most popular entertainment of its time made its way to Riverside. Celebrity appearances from the early days and beyond included Lassie to Star Trek's Leonard Nimoy, along with many popular bands, musical acts, and singers. In fact, as of this writing, hosting concert series is still an annual event at the park under Six Flags management. But musical acts weren't the only type of famous people you may find at the park. Politicians such as Senator Edward Kennedy was seen enjoying several of the park's rides with his family in the late 1970s. Senator John Kerry also made a park appearance in the late 1990s. The 1950s ushered in a brand new era to Riverside. Old favorites like the Riverside skating rink were still as popular as ever, and both the Speedway and Thunderbolt coaster continued to operate at lightning speed. A stroll down the Midway or a putt at the miniature golf course were on par with returning guests. The park throughout its many years of operating always had restaurants, eateries, and other concession stands, and like many amusement parks, these establishments were somewhat a necessity to a park's success. One of the restaurant additions that came in the mid-1950s was the 300-seat Carousel Cafeteria. Carousel horses adorned the cafe, making for a unique theme for this new in-park restaurant. It was now nearing the late 1950s. The turn into the next decade of the 1960s was on the horizon, and one could only imagine what Mr. Carroll had up his sleeve next. The mid-century modern era of the 1950s and the 60s were upon us, and from all accounts, this upcoming decade was going to be a very exciting time for both Riverside as a park and for the guests who were about to experience its new offerings. You might call it Disney meets Riverside, or Riverside meets Disney. However you want to call it, Ed Carroll Sr. was very inspired from what he saw in the new Disneyland park, which had opened in July of 1955 in Anaheim, California. He also was inspired from how Mr. Walt Disney created rides and attractions. They say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Although, if you look at what Ed Carroll Sr. had done with his attractions, you would also see that the original storylines and attractions themselves fit in with Riverside Park's landscape as well. Having said that though, if you were a fan of Disney attractions, this era in Riverside's history was for you. Riverside placed ads in 1959 to showcase all of their new Disney-style attractions, and from the looks of the ads, one can make the conclusion that this was a significant part of Riverside's history, especially fans of Disney who couldn't get out to the West Coast to experience Disneyland. One ad shows the several ride attractions it was opening, including the Teacups, Riverboat Ride, Mine Train, and Jungle Cruise. Opening in 1959 were these several Disney-inspired attractions. First up is the Riverside Park Monorail. Disneyland had its monorail opening up that same year, and besides Disney's version, Riverside Park became the only other amusement theme park to have a monorail ride at that time. The monorail's raised station and loading platform allowed guests to board the ride and embark on their journey. The monorail sign itself, which sat high atop the station, was spelled out in a classic vintage font, complete with vintage-like colors utilized at the time. Park guests reached the station platform by way of a wide ramp that circled around from the midway. Here, you can see that by the blue and orange lines. It was in this area of the park where the monorail station platform was. The blue curved line would be where the riders would walk up the ramp to get to the station platform, and the orange line would be where the monorail would start its journey around the park after leaving the station platform. Manufactured by Universal Design Limited, a company that specialized in building monorails, Riverside's monorail took its park guests on a loop tour of the park. As seen here, the monorail made a complete circle, and along its ride path, it would pass by many of the park's rides and attractions. The conductor would mention these rides as the monorail traveled around the park. Park information and events were also mentioned. Here, the conductor reminds guests riding on the monorail about its nighttime Halloween events.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John, welcome to the Riverside Monorail. Again, just a reminder, folks, 6 o'clock tonight, Riverside Park turns into a haunted haven. That's right, Fright Fest 96 begins at 6. Well, we have 3 haunted rides. The Haunted House, the Nightmare Island, and the Lost Lagoon Ride.
On its way back to the station platform, guests would pass by the park's front entrance area known as Main Street. Views of park guests entering Riverside could be seen on the left side as the monorail station platform came in view on the right side. The elevated monorail passing by the park's front entrance on Main Street also made for a very picturesque atmosphere. Guests would pass through the gates and almost immediately walk under the monorail tracks down Main Street as the monorail traveled above them. This view, from around the 1970s, shows what park guests would have seen around that time period. Before the monorail completed its ride around the park, it traveled over the waters of the Jungle Cruise and then re-entered the midway section of the park as it pulled back into the station platform where riders would get off and another set of riders would board. The ride was featured in ads and park brochures. One park brochure reads, "Above is the ultra-modern train on our monorail system. Ride along the highway of the sky and see Riverside from the air. Our monorail is the only ride of its kind in the East, tripled in size in 60. The monorail gave Riverside a very Disney-esque atmosphere. However, this was just one of the many Disney-style attractions to open up in 1959.
Thank you for riding Riverside's monorail. Please exit off to your left and enjoy the rest of your stay at Riverside Park.
Next, we take a look at Riverside's El Dorado Mine Train ride. Similar in fashion to Disneyland's original Rainbow Caverns Mine Train and Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland, Riverside's version started off its adventure along the western frontier town of El Dorado. This area of the attraction was beautifully built, paying close attention to great detail. Near the front of the ride entrance, one could have their picture taken with the old miner who sat by the railroad tracks within the attraction area. A fun photo opportunity that park guests, young and old, could remember their adventure by in the Old West. The locomotive had the initials RPRR on the sides of its cars. In short, that stood for Riverside Park Railroad. As the train departed the old western town of El Dorado, guests aboard would enter a small tunnel leading out to a riverfront containing a steamboat ride on the left-hand side. The river in this section appears to be man-made, as 1957 historical aerials of this area, before the attractions were built, show it as land with no water present. Old western horse-drawn carriages line the riverfront as the mine train makes its way down to a small outlying western village. Here, a small carriage house and blacksmith shop can be seen. Within the blacksmith shop, old western costumes can be seen within. As the train rounds the corner, it makes its journey back to the old western town of El Dorado, passing by a woodland on its way. Once again, the train enters a tunnel, and as depicted by an ad for this new ride, it's a tunnel of thrills. This area of the tunnel most likely was also inspired by Disneyland's Rainbow Caverns themselves. Once emerging out from the tunnel, the train would once again return to the old western town of El Dorado, where riders on board would exit. On Wednesday, September 1st, 1971, the El Dorado mine train caught on fire. According to news reports, the fire destroyed the ride completely, and the Thunderbolt roller coaster that stood behind it was temporarily shut down. With the El Dorado train ride now gone, the question would be whether or not the ride would be rebuilt, or perhaps something new would take its place. Our next attraction to explore is the Riverside boat ride. The SS Riverside, the name of the boat itself, was a replica steamship of the early 1900s. It even featured two smokestacks, which were common on steamboats of its time. It was built exclusively for the attraction. Seen here, alongside some of its builders, as it was trailered in at Riverside's front entrance of the park. The relaxing cruise down the river took guests past the fort with one of the buildings on fire with flames burning through. As the riverboat would pass by the burning building, it would enter the fort and continue onward to an Indian settlement which lined the river on all sides. The Indian village was themed very well and featured teepees and other things, including riverbank docks with boats and canoes. Perhaps this ad in a Riverside brochure says it best. It reads, "All aboard the riverboat SS Riverside and cruise the big lake. view the colorful Indian village, and see authentic replicas of the Old West. Guests of Riverside boarding the SS Riverside would note how soothing and relaxing an excursion on the smooth water would be, a stark contrast to the other thrilling rides within the park, such as the Thunderbolt roller coaster. With these attractions, Riverside owner Ed Carroll was once again very inspired from Disneyland's Mark Twain boat ride and Fort Wilderness attractions. After exiting the Riverside boat ride, park guests wouldn't have to walk far in order to board the next attraction, which also featured a boat and a waterway. The ride was the Jungle Land Cruise, or as it was commonly referred to as just the Jungle Cruise. The Jungle Cruise. It featured a boat excursion up the Amazon River, and according to this brochure ad, one could visit the exciting land of the headhunters, see the lifelike hippos, rhinos, attacking at every turn, thrills galore. The path and track of the waterway within this attraction did not lead out into the Riverside boat ride river water. They were two separate attractions adjacent to one another. Before setting sail on the river, guests would make their way through the attraction entrance lined with tiki torches and some palm trees. This area alongside the platform would also be lined with small village huts. Once on the boat dock loading platform, guests would enter the boat. The boat was designed to be a replica type of tramp steamer from the early 1900s, complete with a smokestack and candy-striped canopies. Very similar in design to Disneyland's Jungle Cruise boats, the attraction itself at Riverside was also very much inspired by Disneyland's version, which opened on the West Coast back in July of 1955. You can see the direction and path the ride took on its river excursion from this aerial of the ride. The huts that were on the right side of the boat once guests boarded served as another purpose. As the ride begins, the boat enters a long cavern tunnel where things associated with the theming of this ride would be seen. Once coming out of the tunnel, the boat would make a right turn back towards where the loading platform would be. However, the boat would not return to the station. Rather, it would travel on for quite a bit more into the jungle settings. However, in order for guests in the boat not to see the platform on this turn into the river, the huts that were constructed here hid the whole platform and made it feel as if the boat was now deep into the jungles of the Amazon, obscuring the sightlines of the loading platform. This was a well thought out design element within the ride. As guests aboard the boat continued on their jungle adventure, they would be met with many animals and creatures of the water. Other turns within the jungle setting also obscured sightlines within the natural use of trees, vegetation, and another tunnel. The last tunnel, towards the end of the ride, was sort of long and S-shaped. Once the boat emerged out of this last tunnel, it was then on its way back to the loading platform, completing the journey out of the Amazon. We now head onward to the Teacups, a classic, fun family ride to many. When Riverside included this attraction, it was, well, a teacup ride with teacup handles. The handles could be seen on the teacups in this Riverside ad announcing the new ride. However, it was rumored that the ride might have been too similar to Disneyland's Mad Tea Party attraction. For whatever the actual reason was, there is media out there showing Riverside's teacups with both handles on them and then again without handles on them. A new version of the teacups would appear at Riverside at a much later date and time. As the new decade of 1960 came around, Riverside continued to add more rides and more attractions. In the early 60s, the Shoot the Chute ride located between the Jungle Land Cruise and the Riverside boat ride was one of them. Built with a wooden frame, it resembled a roller coaster type look, yet the ride experience would be somewhat of a traditional log flume ride as we know them today. Just like a coaster or log flume, the ride car, in this case a boat-style vehicle, would make its way up to the top of a hill, make a right turn around, and then send riders back down, splashing into the river water. A short yet fun, refreshing ride to experience in the summer heat. In 1962, Riverside opened up what many refer to as the antique cars, or old-fashioned cars. The ride was eventually known as Route 66. This was a fun family ride addition that proved very popular with park guests. Many theme and amusement parks throughout the nation have similar attractions like it. The attraction was usually met with long lines that wrapped around the ride's front entrance and the exit areas. In fact, the Route 66 building seen here was originally used to load riders. A bridge was constructed over the entrance queue line so that riders would cross over the queue and enter the small Route 66 building through a couple of short queue line switchbacks and through the turnstile seen here. From there, the ride attendants would allow riders to board their vehicle and then start their adventure. Here in these pictures, you can see the 4 squares where the old queue line bridge support columns once stood. Even though the bridge had been long gone now for some time, here, the old turnstiles and queue line switchbacks are still visible and weren't taken out until the ride was close to being rethemed years ago. Route 66 was manufactured by Arrow Development, a ride manufacturing company responsible for many attractions in several theme parks, including a bunch of Disneyland's original opening rides and attractions. The idea of Riverside's version was to take the riders on a classic drive through a scenic woodland. Riders would do so in vintage Model T automobiles. Although the ride vehicles were changed out several times, the original Model Ts had covered roofs and sat 4 riders, 2 in front and 2 in the back seat. Although it sometimes was a tight squeeze, most families didn't mind and enjoyed their adventure down Route 66. Later on, the cars were changed out to 2-seaters with no roofs. Some of the theming along your Route 66 adventure would include several classic vintage fuel pumps, as well as a big barn. A couple of small bridges overpassing some interior woodland and vintage street lighting would all add to its theming. A new roller coaster was being installed in the south end of the park. Its name, the Wildcat. It was a Schwarzkopf roller coaster, and the design was Schwarzkopf's first full-scale steel coaster. It was also Riverside's first steel coaster. Similar designs were featured in many other parks. At about 50 feet high, this coaster had its share of fast dips and drops, however, in no way as extreme as some of today's faster, thrilling coasters, and it did not feature any loops. In the early 70s, and as the years went on, park guests would see the Wildcat coaster as they entered the parking lot toll booths and made their way into their parking spots. Prior to the park installing various taller attractions, the Wildcat was one of the very first rides clearly visible from the parking area. For some, it symbolized that you had arrived at Riverside and your day at the park had just begun. Riverside Park's front entrance had changed its look several times throughout the years. In 1969, Ed Carroll Sr. had purchased 2 big pylons from the 1964-65 New York World's Fair, seen here at the front entrance to Riverside Park. Additionally, with the front entrance to the park lined with flagpoles and other World's Fair type ornamentation, Riverside was heading into the 1970s. Around this time, historic aerials show what appears to be the river by the train ride filled in. This river was once home to where the Riversippy and Shoot the Chute rides once operated. With a couple of these attractions from the 1960s decade now completely gone, the mine train included, a big parcel of land at the north end of the park was available for future expansion, although it wouldn't be too long into the future that this section of the park would see something new. Around 1973, 2 very popular rides, the Scrambler and the Rotor, were added. A lot of these rides would be moved around within the park over the years to make way for new attractions. A train ride was once again added to the park, this time minus the Old West Frontier theming. Some small garden areas and seating for relaxing were also added to give this end of the park a bit more scenic atmosphere. This was the north end section of the park. It was here that various smaller flat rides, a Ferris wheel, and a couple of other shows and attractions could be found. On April 8, 1974, a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new International Plaza was held. This new plaza section was located at the north end of the park. Seen here is Riverside Park manager Ed Carroll Jr., far left, and owner Ed Carroll Sr., second in from the right. The ceremony really highlighted a new era for Riverside once again. An area which was once home to a large man-made river would now feature a silver, futuristic dome, serving as a food court with various specialty food selections. Also housed within this dome was a stage, where original Riverside costume characters would hold shows while guests dined. Flags from various nations would also fly high in the sky on nearby flagpoles outside of the Plaza Dome. Up to this point, over the course of several years within Riverside Park history, and under the Carroll's ownership, the park had been graced with several World's Fair attractions and installments that would help add to the mid-century modern atmosphere of the 1950s and 60s. And even though it was around 1973-74, the Carrolls would once again seek out more attractions with that retro modern feel. Meet the Swiss Skyride. The Skyride is a classic attraction found in many theme parks, and this one was no different, except for its unique look. The actual Skyride that would open at Riverside would not start life here. It had resided at another park, and it had an interesting past before it arrived. In 1962, Astroland had opened as an amusement park in Coney Island, New York. The park was going to be somewhat of a futuristic space-age theme. One of the rides that was going to open in Astroland in the early 1960s was the Mercury Capsule Skyride. The Skyride's cable car gondolas were very unique in design, in that they were a round gray capsule with bubble-style windows and flashing lights, which led to their futuristic look and style. The doors on the capsules would open fully for riders to walk in, and each capsule held about 3 riders. It was said there might have been a lack of interest for the ride, and after almost 10 years at Astroland, it was eventually removed and shipped off to Agawam, Massachusetts, where it would find its new home at Riverside Park as the Swiss Skyride. Von Roll, the company out of Switzerland who manufactured the ride, was well known for building their Type 101 Skyrides for many of the theme parks. One of the first Von Rolls to be installed in the US was at Disneyland in 1956. The Riverside Park Skyride was from around 1963 when it opened at Astroland, so it was definitely a product of its time period. However, by the time it reached Riverside, all the bubble glass, futuristic lighting, and such had been removed. The only thing that still resembled the Astroland version of the ride was its round capsule shape and gray color. Before the Skyride capsules could fly high over the park at Riverside, each round capsule car needed to be retrofitted. Since no glass was present anymore on the capsules, the bottom areas had several vertical bars welded on, and the top areas had horizontal metal bars welded on. This way, it made the capsule safe for riders so they wouldn't accidentally fall out of the capsule during the ride. The Skyride was located adjacent to the monorail. In fact, the Skyride's main station by the monorail was built in the exact same spot where the El Dorado mine train resided only 2 years earlier, in 1971, before the fire. The Skyride took riders from the midpoint on the Main Street Midway and over to the north end of the park, where riders could get off at a second station and experience the attractions in that section of the park. While in flight, the Skyride made for some amazing views of the park down below. And as for the Skyride station platforms, they weren't too fancy, just covered buildings that the riders could board and unboard the capsules from. However, that would change greatly many years later, and through some amazing theming, the stations would become an amazing focal point. We'll touch upon more of this transformation a little later on in this documentary. The mid-1970s saw some classic attractions from many decades ago still going strong at the park. One of those attractions? The Riverside Roller Rink, known as the Rollaway. The rink located at Riverside's front entrance was a park icon. Riverside provided roller skating far before Ed Carroll became owner of the park. In fact, there had been skating at Riverside since the early 1900s. The rink went through several upgrades over the years and was a place to go for some good times and where good friends would meet. It had a great following, and people seemed to really enjoy it and the events held at the rink. There were magazine write-ups about the rink, along with memorabilia that people still hold fond of to this day. But those days were about to be numbered. As skating began to diminish for whatever reason, the rollaway would not last too much longer, and by 1978 it was closed, and the building eventually was demolished. A building of fun and great memories that stood in this one spot for so many years was now just a memory. Although the building was demolished at the front entrance to the park, the rollaway was about to breathe new life once again, except this time across the street in a new building, and it was considered the new rollaway. Roller skating was back and better than ever at the new facility, and new memories at this location were starting to take place. The location of the new rollaway opened in 1978. However, it only lasted 20 years, as in 1998, it would close down for good, again, taking with it a long set of memories. The building would later be used as human resources for Six Flags. Another classic attraction that remained strong throughout the decades was the Riverside Park Speedway. As we mentioned before, Ed Carroll Sr. had installed the racetrack back in 1948, replacing a dance hall ballroom down by the Connecticut River. After several decades, it was still going strong.
Come on, fans, let's get excited. You're here at Riverside Park Speedway on Labor Day weekend. A lot of great action coming at you.
Tasmanian in car number 88 is holding off the 44 of Jim Kinsalvo.
Through its many ads and magazines, the Speedway had a lot to offer to its loyal fans. It thrived for many years as an iconic racetrack which was nestled between the park's Thunderbolt coaster and the Connecticut River. The mid-1970s also brought NASCAR racing to the Riverside Speedway, and televised events, complete with commentary, were continuing to race away.
Sunday, it's a Riverside first. That will be at the Sunoco Sun Oil NASCAR Winston Grand National 150.
We'll give you that feeling, a good, happy feeling.
Riverside Park, the roller coaster capital of New England, featuring the exciting Loop Coaster. Take Mass Pike to Exit 6, Springfield, Massachusetts. Now open weekends.
Riverside Park, Riverside, New England's largest amusement park.
That was a commercial Riverside had put out for the 1978 season, which featured the Loop Coaster, which was a new roller coaster that opened a year earlier in 1977. It would also be Riverside's first looping roller coaster. Not too long after its opening, Riverside changed the name to the Black Widow, retheming the car's paint as well as repainting the whole coaster black. Manufactured by Aerodynamics, the company responsible for designing the first modern steel inverting coaster, Corkscrew, at Knott's Berry Farm in Buena Park, California, a couple years earlier. This shuttle-type loop coaster featured a single train consisting of 4 cars. Each car could hold up to 4 riders, 2 across. Ron Toomer, who was a key player within the Aerodynamics company, was one of the best at creating and designing coasters. He is seen here in this interview talking about how he goes about visualizing a roller coaster way before it's even manufactured or constructed.
When I start trying to do something, it's pretty hard to visualize a thing on a piece of paper. So you start doing something in 3D, and you could bend this thing around and turn it into our normal loop, like sort of like that. I draw the things to start with, do the original designs and whatnot, turn that over to the engineering department guys, and they turn it into real geometry and mathematics. When we start on a new ride, we like to, a new totally different experience. We like to build a prototype of the ride, either a full-scale ride or a full-scale part of a ride. It's kind of a scary thing to ride on because we only built part of a ride. There's no lift or anything like that. And we get a big crane out there when it's time and lift this whole track piece up and sit it up on top and then let the thing go. And it does its gyrations around its own center line, comes back and there's nothing there but the end of the track and a bunch of brakes. So it's kind of scary to see this end of the pipes approaching at great speed, and all of a sudden the brakes come on and you stop before going over the edge.
At 56 feet high, it took riders on a 45-mile-per-hour descent down the first drop and immediately into the coaster's only loop. It would then continue up a hill, stop for a bit, and the whole ride would repeat, this time in reverse, until you reach the loading platform again. This was always seen as a unique coaster ride experience to the park, and although not much of a track layout compared to traditional roller coasters, this shuttle loop coaster provided very popular with wait times well into an hour long during peak season. To reach the loading platform, riders would have to walk up several flights to the very top of the platform launch, and in long waits, riders would be at a standstill within the stair flight platforms. This walk up to the loading platform was probably one of the complaints heard most often from riders. However, other than that, the coaster provided to be very popular with park guests. 1979 was the year Riverside saw another aerodynamics ride installation. For this attraction, it was a no-brainer to why Arrow would be called upon. After all, it was Arrow who invented the modern-day log flume as we know it. And so with that, Riverside opened up its first in-park water ride, known as the Red River Rapids. This was very much your typical log flume ride. However, Riverside's version didn't just send you up a lift hill, then splashing back down. Riders would enter the long and winding queue, which emptied out into a large covered loading platform. Anyone who remembers this attraction will probably remember very vividly just how long that winding wrap around the queue took on a hot afternoon in peak season, only for the ride to be over too soon for many. The attraction was seen by most as a way to stay cool in the summer heat and not something of a thrill ride by any means. However, try telling that to the many who still feared the drop as they screamed all the way down. Compared to today's extreme drops, Red River Rapids was quite small in length. However, back in 1979, when the ride was new, it gave park guests a fun way to stay cool, and many who got on the ride enjoyed it. Once riders boarded their hollowed-out log vehicles, the water ride adventure would begin. As the ride progressed, riders would go through various twists and turns before reaching the lift hill. The time it took to navigate through the somewhat themed attraction of tall grass, trees, and a couple of other themed buildings along the way was approximately 1 minute. At the 1 minute mark, the log vehicle would start its ascent up the lift hill. Once at the top, like any log flume would, riders would plunge down into the cold, refreshing waters and return back to the loading platform. Speaking of plunge, after about 20 years or so operating under the name Red River Rapids, the ride would eventually be renamed to the Poland Spring Plunge, with Poland Springs as its sponsor. Another notable ride to come to the park in 1979 was the Zamperla-built swings, a classic-type swing ride that went around in a circular motion. It was originally located directly across from the International Plaza Food Court Dome. The swings were very ornate and included a beautiful amount of very fancy detailing. In 1979, Ed Carroll Jr. became the manager and owner of Riverside after his father, Ed Carroll Sr., had passed away. Since his purchase of Riverside Park back in 1939, Ed Carroll Sr. had built his great theme park continuously for about 40 years straight, and within those years, Mr. Carroll had added a plethora of rides and attractions, sometimes adding a brand new attraction or two every year. His legacy as a theme park owner who took Riverside from disrepair to New England's largest theme park was something that Ed Carroll Jr. would now have to take over. With Ed Carroll Jr. now at Riverside's helm, the 1980s were just around the corner, and shortly thereafter, Riverside did something it had not done before. A pay-one-price admission became the way guests would purchase tickets. Up until this point in time, Riverside had always had free admission to its park. If a park guest wanted to ride any of the attractions, they would simply purchase attraction tickets. This was something Ed Carroll Sr. felt would attract people to the park. Most amusement parks and smaller carnivals operated in the same fashion back then, as it was the norm. But prior to the pay-one-price admission implementation, there was other pay options that Riverside gave its park guests. A 1978 park brochure shows how the park was moving in the direction of pay-one-price admission. The park guests at this point in time had two options: pay an admission fee of $6.50 for adults and $3.25 for kids, ages 3 to 8 years old. These prices included full admission to all of the park's rides, shows, and attractions. Guests could ride rides unlimited times without having to pay again. Another option, though, similar in fashion to what the park had in place all along up until this point, was pay per ride. The only difference this time around was the general admission price. Park guests could pay a $1 admission fee, which included all shows. However, they would have to pay per ride. This last option would be great for parents or others who came to Riverside with other guests in their party who rode rides, but they themselves didn't. Ticket booths would still have to be present in order to accommodate those guests who only paid the $1 general admission. All of this, though, was about to change in the next several years, and by the early 1980s, park guests paid a one-price admission fee to get into the park. This eliminated the option to pay per ride once in the park, as all guests now paid full admission with unlimited rides and attractions at the front gate. This also eliminated the need for in-park ticket booths. These days, this way of paying has become standard amongst the top theme parks, and eventually, those who purchase annual passes benefit even more from a substantial savings over the year, and do not have to wait in long lines to purchase a single-day ticket during each visit. It was the early 80s, and one of the biggest and most talked about rides that was installed at Riverside was soon to become a staple attraction. It was the inclusion of the Riverside Park Cyclone in 1983. This would become the park's most famous wooden coaster at the time. The plan was to make it similar in nature to Coney Island's Cyclone, however, on a smaller scale. William Cobb was the designer of the Cyclone, and in June of 1983, the Cyclone opened to rave reviews. The following video excerpt from the construction phase and opening day details a bit more on what it took to get the Riverside Cyclone up and running.
It's called the King of the Amusement Park, the ultimate thrill ride. It's the roller coaster, or rather, it's the Riverside Cyclone. It all started in the fall of 1982. Riverside Park made a commitment to the future. This commitment was the decision to create the most extensive addition to New England's largest amusement park in its 43-year history. Marketing studies conducted at theme parks across the country were consulted and revealed that the most popular attraction universally was a good roller coaster. Edward J. Carroll Jr., Riverside Park general manager and owner, didn't want a good roller coaster. He wanted the greatest roller coaster and commissioned the best in the business, William L. Cobb, to design exactly that. Carroll decided on the Cyclone design after careful research. The deciding factor was the reputation earned by the other two such roller coasters at Coney Island in Brooklyn, New York, and Astro World in Houston, Texas, as the most breathtaking thrill rides in the country. The Riverside Cyclone was to be not only the most vicious roller coaster ever, but also the most unique. To start, the Cyclone covers less acreage and is taller than most other roller coasters. This, combined with precise pacing or incorporating heart-stopping pauses, ensured that the Riverside Cyclone would be faster, more precipitous, and more exciting than any other roller coaster. Located adjacent to Route 159 and the Loop Coaster, the Riverside Cyclone rises 112 feet above the ground, 20 feet or more over its sister coasters. The 3,600 feet of track will start up a 28-degree lift, one of the steepest in existence, and begin the fun by dropping 112 feet at a 54-degree angle into an unprecedented 60-degree high-speed bank turn. In just 3 seconds, riders will go from 0 to 60 miles per hour. Several times during the ride, guests will experience total weightlessness and pressure up to 3 G-forces.
A 12-inch bolt.
Scores of laborers hired locally worked with skilled engineers through the winter and spring to ready the newest Cyclone for the grand opening on June 25th, 1983.
There you go. Wherever you can. It's dedicated. Yay!
The Riverside project was the focal point of a $1 million advertising campaign and attracted the attention of media throughout the Northeast, as well as such national publications as Time and Us magazines. With the support of the new edition, Riverside Park expects to attract over 1 million people to Agawam in the summer of 1983 alone.
Do you still have your stomach?
Oh, yeah.
Awesome, awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
Unbelievable.
Best ride I've ever been on. Best ride.
The Riverside Cyclone is not only a milestone in the amusement industry, but also a commitment to economic growth in western Massachusetts.
The 1980s also played host to some pretty big attractions. A colossal Ferris wheel gave the park guests the most amazing views of the park, the Connecticut River, and the surrounding areas. The name of this big Ferris wheel? The Colossus. And what a fitting name. Built by Vekoma, it was touted as one of the biggest Ferris wheels in the world. It stood tall at 150 feet. Some roller coasters don't even reach that height, and although it was big and tall, unlike a roller coaster high in the sky, this Ferris wheel took its time as it made its way around. As riders would board their gondola car, they would begin their ascent up 150 feet, but not before stopping every couple of seconds as it seemed. Because of the amount of gondola cars that the wheel had, it took a very long time to fill each car and move on up to the top. By the time all the cars were full, riders would get up to its peak height of 150 feet with a spin around fully, or just make their way back down eventually without a full spin, depending on the load-unload capacity of any given ride. Either way, the views were spectacular. This was definitely one of the best attractions to snap that aerial picture, as riders could easily see down to the other end of the park. Around this time period, some other flat rides and attractions became staples at the park, some lesser known, and some more well known with park guests. One attraction that was pretty popular for a bit was Frankenstein's Castle. Seen here in this video screenshot, the castle stood to the left of where the Antique Cars Route 66 ride was. Frankenstein's Castle was a haunted funhouse which utilized scare actors along with other gags. Consisting of 2 floors with a haunted staircase up to the top level and various rooms to walk through. After the castle attraction was taken out, various food concessions took its place. One of the more well-known and very popular rides that stayed throughout the 80s decade was a dark ride called Pirates Cove. Another nod to Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean, of course based on a pirate theme, this ride had a bit of history to it. For one thing, it was a throwback to 1959 when the Jungle Land cruise was operating. In fact, Pirates Cove utilized the very same ride path and ride configuration that the Jungle Land cruise once had. And that's because, in essence, it was the very same ride. Well, rethemed of course. Similar, if not the same boats were used, however, the boats were retooled to fit the pirate theme more appropriately. The front entrance facade to the Pirates Cove attraction was done up very nice. Riders would enter the attraction queue line on the left-hand side of the themed facade, while riders would exit on the right-hand side, over a bridge, through a small interior building, down some stairs, and out onto the midway. The ride itself was at the very entrance to the International Plaza area of the park. Just like with the Jungle Land cruise attraction, the monorail also came by over the waters of Pirates Cove to make for a nice little touch to the area. Once park guests boarded the boat, it would then be off on a pirate adventure. Riders in the boat started off outside within the elements, and as the boat slowly moved forward, a giant skull would be seen, which had doors that the boat would push open and the boat would then pass through them. From this photo, the skull entrance can be seen underneath the orange arrow. As soon as the boat entered through the skull entrance, the doors would close behind the boat and riders would find themselves in the dark for a bit. As things could be heard, the area illuminates a bit and it's clear that the boat has entered a long darkened tunnel cave. On the right side of the boat, animatronic pirates behind bars within this cave setting can be seen and heard. As the boat exits the cave, it returns back outside into a jungle of trees and other lush vegetation, only to eventually be brought back into a second set of tunnels. This tunnel being the S-shaped tunnel again used within the Jungle Land cruise. As the boat makes its way out of the tunnel, a big waterfall is seen blocking and cascading over the exit where the boat is now headed. However, it's not shutting off. Well, until the boat of riders is directly upon the exit itself, the water shuts off, but not even fully, as water drips heavily in some areas more than others. This picture gives you an idea of what it would have looked like as you left the cave and returned back to the loading platform. It was the early 1990s, and this would in fact be the last decade that the park would be known as Riverside. The park at this point had a couple of aging rides from the past, one of them being the monorail. However, even though it was showing its age, it was still up and running from the day it debuted back in 1959. Going into the new 1990 decade, Riverside had a couple of new rides here and there. Balloon Race, which opened in 1989, was one of them. However, it wasn't until the mid to late 90s where new rides were starting to be constructed and older rides would unfortunately meet the wrecking ball. Pirates Cove during this time was one of them. Well, kind of. Although the ride continued to operate, it would once again receive a retheme, or as some noticed, a pirate D-theme. Once known as the heavily themed Jungle Land Cruise, it was eventually rethemed to Pirates Cove, and this time around the ride would be transformed to the Lazy River. The Lazy River attraction once again followed the same path, track, and configuration as both the Jungle Land Cruise and Pirates Cove rides. The difference this time around would be that the ride was more a relaxing journey through a river setting. All tunnels and caves that once housed animatronics from the previous rides were now gone. As the Lazy River ride starts off onto the same path that once the Jungle Land Cruise and Pirates Cove went through, riders continue on a slow ride around the river. The attraction did in fact have several things riders could see along the way. For example, during Riverside's Halloween event, there were many decorations placed around the river's ride path, along with festive atmosphere. As the ride returns back to the loading platform, this time around, there would be no tunnel caves and waterfall shutoffs, as there was once before. Riverside Park had its fair share of flat rides over the years. New ones would arrive, old ones would leave, and one from 1973 secured its stay at the park. It was the Scrambler. For a period of time, it was known as the Mine Scrambler. Seen here in 1996, the actual Scrambler ride was housed inside this dome-shaped pavilion. The closed-in space allowed for another dimension as the ride operated. As the years went on, the Scrambler was relocated within the park. However, it would not be enclosed anymore. In 1996, a big moment in Riverside Park's history was about to happen. After 57 years owned by the Carroll family, Ed Carroll Jr. was ready to sell his park to a company by the name of Premier Parks. Premier had purchased several other parks as well, and now Riverside Park would be added to its collection. A historic chapter within Riverside's history was now closed. Some of the very last rides that survived over from the 1960s, in one form or another, would soon be just a park memory with new rides, attractions, and rethemed shops being constructed in their place. Some buildings, however, did stand the test of time and remain from Riverside's early days. However, they now had facades of new buildings constructed over them to create more of a themed atmosphere in any given area. In this picture dated December 6, 1996, Ed Carroll Jr. is seen here standing at the entrance of one of Riverside's dining establishments with the long-standing monorail station platform in the background. This picture of an owner with his park would be one of the last before Premier started work on major improvements and expansions over the next several years. Now, with Premier Parks as owner, Riverside was being primed for some major changes over the next several years. Riverside Park's name was one of those changes. Although not a full name change at first, the park would now be known as Riverside, the Great Escape. Riverside would receive a brand new entrance. The original entrance that stood for many years would now be demolished to make way for a more grand entrance with a New England-style theme to it. This picture, from February of 1997, shows parts of the main gate entrance being torn down. The entrance area and path down into the park would be expanded quite a bit, and make this area, which was named Main Street, much wider and longer to what it was previously. Seen in this aerial of the park is the entrance transformation. A new building to house its 1909 Ilion's Carousel was being constructed that would eventually greet guests after entering the main gates. The original entrance where guests would both drive to the parking lots and walk into the park for years was now going to be closed off to all guests for future expansion and backstage use. Eventually, over the next several years, as the park started to expand even more, the parking lot seen here to the left would be moved across the street to old farmland. As more of these expansions to the park would take place, less and less parking was available in the original parking lot, and the need for a new big lot was essential. Also, the new lot would feature new parking toll gates. A bridge linking that new parking lot to the park's main gates would also be constructed over the public road Main Street. Guests arriving across the street parking in the new lot would board trams via several parking lot tram stations, so they can be transported to the front of the new bridge. Once onboarding the trams, guests would walk up the stairs or ramps, over the bridge, down more stairs, and wind up directly in front of the main gates. This seamless way of getting from the car to the main gates made it fairly easy to get into the park and was a nice touch during the park's big expansions. The Main Street entrance had been there for years. It had seen many changes. Other areas of the main entrance where park guests would first be introduced to the park also had several variations. One thing guests would notice on their trips back to Riverside after the Premier purchase was that the monorail tracks were missing from the park's main entrance area. Once greeting people from above as they walked down into the park, it was no longer. Several reminders of the monorail traveling through the area were still standing, like this building, which was once a pass-through tunnel for the monorail and its tracks. The pass-through tunnel portion was covered up, and the whole building was eventually resurfaced, and with that, visually no traces of there being a monorail were evident at the main entrance. Across the way, Riverside's clock that once told time in the grass-like setting was also re-landscaped at some point. After close to 40 years in operation, the monorail ride itself, along with all of its track within the park, had also been removed. The monorail station platform was demolished, and in its place, new building facades were constructed. Underneath the new facades, new shops opened as well. Although shops underneath the monorail platform had existed for some time, the shops were originally home to the bumper cars. These new shops and the surrounding areas were getting major rethemes. The area now had a very cohesive theme and a feeling of New England architecture and atmosphere. The buildings themselves also had some fun company names to make it feel even more like a bustling little New England town. Exceptional detail was paid close attention to, and the facades were a warm welcome addition to Riverside, the Great Escape. Let's take a closer look at these buildings and their unique detail. Although the retheming and addition of facades in this area would have been alone a great addition to Riverside's atmosphere, it was only the beginning of what was to come for almost all other areas of the park. In essence, no portion of the park would be left out, and new theme sections would start to become the park's new norm as the years progressed, and even another name for the park was soon on the horizon. In the meantime, Premier definitely had its work cut out for them. A new look as well as some new rides were planned and constructed to open for the 1997 season, which would also be the first season under the new Premier ownership. One of Premier's planned rides was a new roller coaster named Mind Eraser. It was constructed in the south end of the park where a side entrance to Riverside once stood. With about 2,260 feet of track above riders' heads, this new Vekoma suspended looping coaster provided 5 inversions with speeds of around 50 miles per hour. The area where Mind Eraser was constructed was part of a small expansion and only had about 1 or 2 more smaller attractions at first. However, that would also change in the next several years or so. Riverside had a very historic attraction within its collection of rides, the Carousel. It had stood the test of time, and regarding that new building constructed for Riverside's Carousel at the park's front entrance, it would now hold the 1909 Ilions Carousel Mr. Carroll purchased and debuted at the park when it opened in 1940. The Carousel, as of this writing, is still at the park's front entrance today for park guests to keep enjoying. The Carousel was refurbished, and its new building would complement it well. This was no ordinary carousel, and in fact, some one-of-a-kind features reside on it. Another new attraction, constructed to open in 1997, was Shipwreck Falls. The area in sight to which Shipwreck Falls was to be constructed on was the former Lazy River Ride, which had also been the home to both Pirates Cove and the Jungle Land Cruise in the past. For the first time since the Jungle Land Cruise had been constructed back in 1959, this new attraction, Shipwreck Falls, would not make use of the former ride's track and ride path configuration. In short, everything that was left from the former rides was scrapped, the site gutted, and the only thing that would emerge to be the same as its predecessors was the water portion of the new ride itself. Shipwreck Falls was sort of a shoot-the-chute flume ride. On a side note, This new water ride was constructed adjacent to where Riverside once had their original Shoot the Chute water ride in the days when the Mine Train and Riverside rides were operating. The ride was heavily themed to give it a New England fishing village atmosphere, and the ride delivered in that department. From the moment riders arrive at the attraction's entrance, they are greeted by a large shark in front of the nautical shack offering boat tours. As riders head in further to the attraction, they end up by the boat docks that take them over a long, extended bridge walkway, which in fact is the ride's queue line. The walkway wraps around the outskirts of the attraction and straight into the ride's loading platform where the riders board the boats. Along the way within the queue are themed buildings and other trees and vegetation to take riders further into the atmosphere of this attraction. Apart from it being a water ride with water, it was far different in look to the attractions that came before it. The theming of the ride also included nothing less than, well, a shipwrecked boat which appears to be washed up on a little island. Like traditional flume rides, the boats make their way up a hill, and once atop, the boat veers right and travels a short distance before making the plunge down into the waters below, making a big splash. The exit of the ride consists of a walkway-type bridge in which the boat travels under after its descent down the hill. Riders exiting can feel the splash of the boats as they walk down the bridge, and many stand around waiting for the next boat to splash down so they could cool off on a hot day. The areas around the descent hill were also themed very nicely, with many trees surrounding the ride's hill and beautiful rock work around the lagoon areas. From outside of the attraction, park guests could steer remote-controlled boats via big captain steering wheels placed in front of the metal gates directly in front of where the boats would be. There were multiple boats available to steer, and it was definitely a fun little side attraction to partake in. With just a couple of years to go until the end of the 90s decade, owner Premier Parks was continuing the Carol's venture of being New England's largest amusement park, except with so much invested into the park via new attractions and area expansions, what was once referred to as an amusement park would now become more of what looked like a theme park. In 1998, Premier Parks bought the Six Flags chain, and Premier Parks' name itself would also change over to the Six Flags brand. This was a game changer, especially when it came to Riverside. However, the official changeover that the actual public could see wouldn't happen for another 2 years. In the meantime, and behind the scenes, Premier, now known as Six Flags, was getting things ready for its big debut as a Six Flags park. The park would expand even further since Premier's purchase back in 1996. One new ride experience, the Hellevator, took riders up 20 stories only to bring them back down in a lightning-fast freefall to the ground. At around 200 feet in the air, this tall red tower gave riders magnificent views not only of the park, but the surrounding areas of the town as well. A couple of years later, in 2000, when the park was rebranded to Six Flags, the ride was renamed to Scream. It added 2 more towers and was painted white. The ride also included 3 mode variations that riders could experience, including modes that sent riders straight up the towers at lightning-fast speeds, and other modes that brought riders up to the top to then plummet down at lightning-fast speeds, all with various different drop configurations. Scream became a Six Flags focal point to the park guests as they entered the park's Main Street entrance. No matter where guests were in the park, the towers of Scream could easily be seen from many vantage points. The Six Flags name logo, along with several flags, could be seen at the very top of the 3 towers, and at night, the Six Flags logo illuminated. Around this time, a new water park named Island Kingdom had been constructed on Riverside's grounds. It would become Riverside's first official water park. This aerial comparison of the park from 1990 to around 2001 shows just how much space was taken away from Riverside's original parking lot area. Over the years, Riverside played host to many water rides and water slide sections within its park. However, there was no dedicated area which featured a full-scale water park environment. Island Kingdom changed all of this and became very popular very fast. Park guests could immerse themselves within this lush, very well-themed atmosphere. Some of the highlighted attractions at the new water park included an extremely huge wave pool and beachfront areas, along with several dining options, gift shops, and other things, all beautifully and highly themed to an island getaway. Even the landscaping featured palm trees amongst other lush vegetation. What's even better, the water park was free to guests with park admission. As we move along into 1999, it was a big year for everyone in the world. A new millennium was amongst us, and a new era would be on its way very soon. For Riverside, the Great Escape, it was no different. Although still operating under the name of Riverside, Six Flags had currently owned the park. The park was in preparation behind the scenes, as well as within the park itself, to bring on big improvements, additions, and expansions for its debut as a Six Flags park the following year in 2000. The expansions were of very high, immersive quality, and there were many. This park map from 1999 shows a lot of where new attractions will be placed for the new upcoming 99 season. As we start to take a look into this vast expansion of 1999, we are met with this park brochure, also from the 99 season, that mentions a whole host of new and exciting things debuting at the park. On the map, park guests would now see what appeared to be another name change. Again, still including the Riverside brand, but now the brochures would read Riverside, the Thrill Park. This was a fitting name, especially for this season, as it now was more identified as a full-on theme park with all of its makeovers it had been receiving. Riverside expanded its already huge water park, Island Kingdom. In fact, it would become 50% bigger in size and accommodate many more water park attractions than it had the previous year in 1998. Also, a whole new area, Crack Axle Canyon, was built. A complete town heavily themed to the old Wild West. Making a home in the Wild West area was a new attraction called Houdini, the Great Escape. An amazing special effects dark ride type of attraction housed in a very detailed building from the Old West. Houdini, the Great Escape, became a park favorite for many over the years as it tried to mystify everyone who dared to enter. Vekoma, the manufacturer of this elaborate attraction, definitely set out to make a pretty unique ride. One should really experience this attraction for themselves to get the true essence and atmosphere of it all. The ride's facade is that of Crackaxle Canyon's own opera house. However, reports seem to suggest that it was once the home mansion to Harry Houdini himself. Well, in the backstory to the ride at least. As riders enter the house, several large old-time carnival posters are seen, all themed to the mystifying Houdini himself. As riders continue through the house's queue, they finally arrive at one of Houdini's rooms within the house. This room features ornate gargoyles, candelabras, a fireplace, and what appears to be some of Houdini's mystifying magic tricks that, well, seem to have a mind of their own at times. This room also acts as the pre-show for the ride. The lighting from the dim candelabras add to its mystery to why guests are here in the first place. Then the pre-show starts explaining things further. During the pre-show, those other mystifying items in the room start to come to life, and with that, the doors open for riders to enter into Houdini's parlor.
On Halloween Day, 1926, Houdini died. With his wife Bess at his side, he promised her that if there were any way to contact her from beyond the grave, he would find her. Look around his library, watch for his signs. Look, see the disturbance of the candles as they flicker. And maybe his spirit is there. There. Stay with me. Concentrate. Concentrate. We're so close. Feel his presence growing stronger and stronger.
Today, you are invited to take part in Houdini's ultimate feat, his triumphant return from the great beyond. What you see may not be as it seems. Do not be fooled by charlatans and fakes. Silence.
Enter this place. Nothing of this earth can hold me. Enter.
This room, with ornate decorations, fancy draped windows, and more candelabras, set the mood. What's about to happen next is anyone's guess. However, some may say they experience what feels like a slight sense of pressure upon themselves as things start to happen. Voices are heard, sound effects start up, thunder and lightning occur, and the room starts to move. Or does it?
Marjorie. Very shortly, you won't be able to trust your own senses. So for your safety, I will lock you securely in place with these keys.
After a while, with more spooky sound effects and voices, riders seem to find themselves moving around the room. Or is the room moving around them? At some point, the room goes completely upside down. What was once the floor is now the ceiling, and vice versa. After some more mystifying events, the room eventually goes back to being right side up, and riders are left to wonder what just took place. Houdini, The Great Escape, is a fun attraction that park guests love to experience over and over again. This new, highly themed area, Crack Axle Canyon. If you were a fan of the Wild West, then this area of the park did not disappoint. Everything from period lighting, the street poles, and the like were featured here, and the Western-themed building details were paid very close attention to. Buildings had Western-themed names and authentic Western designs. Now let's take a look at some more of the amazing detail as seen from its early days of Six Flags New England. Various dining options and shops would also find a home in this Old West section. This area was host to several rides. One of them was the bumper cars, or as seen here, the ride was renamed to Stagecoach Bumper Buggies. A couple more rides make their home here as well. On a side note, the bumper cars would eventually call Crack-Axle Canyon their home. However, prior to the move, they lived somewhere else within the park. Seen here in this video screenshot from 1996, it was this building that housed the bumper cars. The surrounding area buildings can also still be seen today. However, many of them down on street level have been heavily modified and rethemed with new facades. Park guests recall riding the bumper cars in this location as far back as the 1980s and 90s. The building, as of this riding, is still there, although it doesn't house the bumper cars anymore. You can see in this aerial matchup of the area the 1996 video screenshot as it compares to current day. Although some buildings remain, a lot has changed in and around the old bumper cars building. A ride measuring stick could also be seen outside of the old bumper cars building. Other additions in '99 included Blizzard River, a river rafting ride that replaced a whole section in the park's north end that featured several tall, closed-in tube slides. This family water ride was a refreshing way to cool off on a hot day. Riders could board a large 8-seat raft and once secured in, begin to make their journey into a raging river in the woods. A raft ascends up a lift hill, and when it reaches the top, it then empties out into the raging rivers below. Throughout the adventure, riders are met with some cool theming, waterfalls, tunnels, and a themed boathouse that the riders pass through towards the end of the ride. Then it's back to the loading station for another set of adventure-seeking riders. Other additions in '99 included the new family teacups, although the park did have another version of the teacups in the past. The brochure even mentions the Riverside Park Speedway as being NASCAR's #1 short track. But for how long would this historic track last? Startoon Studios was a great addition to the park. It was a kiddie ride section themed to a Hollywood movie studio in its backlot. Its name somewhat foreshadowed the cartoon studios that it would eventually become once the Six Flags brand was integrated into the park. The section it was built on had several kid rides in the past, including Ricky's Little Twister, which was a small kid-sized roller coaster that was very low to the ground, however big enough to allow kids who rode it a sense of what a roller coaster would be like to a certain degree. At one point in the 1980s, this part of the park was known as Kiddie City. Prior to Startoon Studios taking over the area, part of the area near Kiddie City was home to the Superdome Pavilion located in the International Plaza section of the park. Across from the dome was the area home to the Wave Swinger, which now featured the balloon race ride. Riverside Park had their very own picnic grove for many decades. After all, the amusement park did start off as a picnic grove only, before its many years of redevelopment and expansions took place. Not the original Gallops or Riverside Grove, however, a huge amount of land was set aside for this picnic area. Whether it was known over the years as the Private Picnic Grove, Riverside Picnic Grove, or eventually River's Edge Picnic Grove, the main idea, layout, and concept stayed the same for the most part from Riverside days right on into the Six Flags era. Private parties in large groups, including organization functions and company picnics, all had the option to rent out this area. It was a great addition to the amusement park, and it gave guests a secluded little retreat away from the main park itself. Guests could find this secluded grove by heading over to the Thunderbolt coaster or the Kiddieland section of the park. Once at that point, guests would walk down a beautiful landscaped path. As guests continued on, they would walk over a bridge with a running stream underneath. A couple of steps more, lined by woodlands of tall trees and other vegetation, and guests would arrive at an open area with a water fountain display in the middle. From there, another open area emerges into what is the front entrance of the picnic grove itself. On the right side, a big massive pavilion awaits guests in groups of virtually any size. As one ventured in past these areas, a big in-ground pool would also be seen alongside the pavilion. As guests make their way even further onto the picnic grounds, several more smaller pavilions could be seen on each side, with each pavilion having its own name. Two big bathroom buildings and a big area of grass used for concerts and events in the center of all the smaller pavilions round out the picnic grove. This middle area of grass would be the main venue for concerts and events once Riverside Speedway, which at one time held concerts, was closed and demolished. Before the park had closed down for the 1999 season, park guests reported seeing a lot of Looney Tunes merchandise within various shops and around the park. There were signs of Warner Brothers and Looney Tunes starting to pop up. Guests might not have thought much about it while they were seeing this brand now at Riverside. Up until this point, Riverside had its own characters and mascots, along with their own merchandise to go along with it. One of them was Captain Rivy. Another, Ricky Raccoon. But all of the old Riverside characters and merchandise would soon become a thing of the past as Six Flags merchandise and shopping venues would take over the following year in the 2000 season. As the 1999 season came to an end and the last park guests left, the Riverside gates would close one final time under the name it had carried in one form or another for almost a century. What had started as a picnic grove and transformed into a very large amusement park would now become a world-class theme park known as Six Flags New England. A fitting name, seeing the park was situated in New England. But before the park could open under its new identity, there was a lot of work that needed to be done in order for it to make its grand debut in the 2000 season, and on top of that, a very short schedule of getting it all done was what the park was facing. Off-season only consisted of 6 months or so. Although a lot of work to rebrand Riverside as a Six Flags theme park was already in place, with areas of the park already themed and new attractions open from the previous year, all of it had to be cohesive enough to get that true Six Flags feeling that the company is known for. Repainting, repaving, retheming, new facades, and adding even more new attractions and whole themed areas were on the list of things that needed to get done. In order for some of this to happen, unfortunately, a bunch of Riverside's past rides and attractions would have to go, and other historic attractions and areas of the park would be saved to fit into the new Six Flags park in an effort to provide a historic remembrance of Riverside. At the end of the 1999 season, the Black Widow coaster, a park staple since 1977, would meet its demise. It was disassembled and stored off-site for possible future use. However, reports say that it was eventually scrapped. Built in its place would be the Vekoma Boomerang Coaster Flashback. At 117 feet high, it provided 3 inversions traveling at around 47 miles per hour. This would prove to be a great replacement for the Black Widow, as it too was a shuttle coaster design. That is, the coaster itself is not traditional in nature, in which the coaster trains make a full complete trip around and back to the station. Instead, it has to reverse at some area within the ride to get back to the station, and both the Black Widow and the new Flashback did just that. The Flashback coaster also provided a loop similar in fashion to the Black Widow. Another great feature was that Flashback didn't have riders climb up several stories to the top of the coaster loading platform like the Black Widow did, and instead, the loading platform of the flashback coaster was right at the bottom of the ride. On the right side of the coaster, a small restaurant building can be seen. Another restaurant building that was identical used to reside on the left-hand side. However, it was removed along with the Black Widow to accommodate for the flashback coaster. With the saying, all things must come to an end, the Riverside Park Speedway had taken its final lap around the track at the end of the 1999 season. It wasn't a ride this time around that was going to be dismantled, rather an attraction that greeted guests for just over a half a century. Fans gathered to see the final races and to bid farewell to the racetrack that Ed Carroll Sr. opened back in 1948. 51 years of racing down at the racetrack would now be coming to an end. With a cool breeze off the Connecticut River and the roars of engines racing around the track, fans that have graced the stands of the Speedway wondered just what it would be like not having races anymore at the park. Fond memories from the fans would be what would carry on the Speedway's legacy into the future. So what was it that Six Flags had planned for this large parcel of land that sat beside the Connecticut River? If the Speedway and its cars that raced it were a symbol of superpower, then the next attraction, or attractions constructed here, should probably possess some type of superpower as well. That superpower would come in the form of a brand new land and area themed as DC Superhero Adventures. Here, within this new area, which would be set to open the following year, along with the Six Flags Grand Opening debut, it would be all about superheroes possessing, well, superpowers. With all of these major changes going on, it was finally announced in late 1999 that the park was officially rebranded as Six Flags New England. It would open as such the following year. Riverside Park, as many knew it, would now have its final chapter in its long history come to a close. From its own mascots, original branded merchandise, the Riverside logo, and everything that was once associated with this great amusement park would now become collectible items for those who had the opportunity to buy some, what is now Riverside's past. Riverside, over the years, had every kind of merchandise a park guest could imagine, and each item had great detail on it, from its own park attractions and more. This merchandise, once bought in the parks, was now considered Riverside memorabilia. The countless newspaper ads, park brochures, and maps over the years would now act as a remembrance, and with that, a new century was upon us. A new park would also soon be waiting for us. This new park would once again reside in the footprint of the old Riverside and once again expand into the future like it did so many times before. On May 5th, 2000, Six Flags New England officially opened to the public. The company invested a good amount of money to bring the park up to Six Flags standards. Being that of a world-class theme park company which has many parks in its portfolio, it was now bringing their theme park expertise to New England. This would also be a pivotal point in the park's history. The transformation of Riverside, the amusement park, to Six Flags, the theme park. As we explore Six Flags New England, we will highlight each area and explain how these various sections have changed since their days at Riverside Park. We will also take a look at the new, innovative rides and attractions put in place for the new theme park, as well as all of the retheming that was done. Six Flags New England worked with several existing rides and structures from the Riverside days, along with many of their own new rides, shows, and attractions. Six Flags also rethemed a lot of the areas originally found within Riverside Park. All of the rethemed areas would now have a cohesive theme throughout, and the idea was to have a specific section of the park hold the theme throughout everything it contained, which included its rides, shows, dining, and store options. Of course, Riverside had theme areas and rides in the past. However, the new park was moving into the future, with even more great theming and advancements in technology. New areas with highly detailed and immersive theming would be created, and Six Flags set out to deliver a great product to the public. To make the eventual rebrand switch, many areas of the park started to get the new Six Flags rethemed treatment a couple of years prior to its grand opening in 2000. When Six Flags New England opened, they paid tribute to Riverside Park's long history in several ways. Here, at the Riverboat Cafe, the sign itself features a steamboat which was, as we mentioned towards the beginning of this documentary, a way of transportation to the park when it was more or less just a picnic grove. The name of this cafe also could be seen as a reference back to the early days of Riverside's past. Speaking of the picnic grove, Riverside's picnic grounds were eventually renamed River's Edge. The sign down by River's Edge Picnic Grove features a steamboat on the Connecticut River. The Midway was another nod to the old park and its owner. It was renamed to Carroll Drive. This was to pay tribute to the Carroll family who had previously owned the park. As we mentioned a bit earlier, Ed Carroll Sr. was credited for taking a park in disrepair during rough times and turning it into one of New England's largest amusement parks. Another ride in the north end of the park, which was held over from the Riverside days, was the Riverside Cyclone. For whatever reason one liked the Cyclone, one thing for sure is that it survived the Six Flags rebrand. After the grand opening of Six Flags New England in 2000, it continued to operate as a Cyclone, dropping the Riverside part of its name. The original Riverside Cyclone was a very beloved, iconic landmark within the park itself. To many, it had seemed like it had been there forever, and 31 years at the park was a long time. At the time of its opening in 1983, besides the Black Widow Loop Coaster and the Kiddie Coaster, the Riverside Cyclone was really the only other full-size coaster at the park, along with the Thunderbolt Coaster, which had been at the park since 1941. Through the years, the Cyclone had its fair share of modifications, train replacements, and more to try giving it a smoother ride experience. However, its biggest change to date came in 2015 when the ride was renamed to Wicked Cyclone. But it wasn't just a name change, rather a complete overhaul and transformation to the coaster itself. It could be said that major modifications were implemented. However, that might even be an understatement, as Wicked Cyclone would now feature a hybrid of steel and wood to a once all-wooden classic roller coaster. Rocky Mountain Coasters was on the job to transform Cyclone to Wicked Cyclone. Cyclone closed in July of 2014 in order to have Wicked Cyclone on track for its debut at the park for the 2015 season. And on May 24, 2015, Wicked Cyclone opened to the park guests, and it was immediately met with positive reviews. It also became the Best New Attraction winner voted by USA Today readers. So it's safe to say Wicked Cyclone had a lot to live up to. First off, the track would now become steel to give it a smoother ride. Its supports were made up of both wood and steel. All of this lended to it being hybrid in nature. In fact, it would become the first hybrid coaster on the East Coast. The track measures in around 3,320 feet, around 109 feet tall, and with a speed of 55 miles per hour. The coaster also includes a first of its kind to have a 200-degree stall and 2 0G rolls, not to mention a great amount of airtime. All of these changes alone would have made for a great new and improved coaster experience. However, Six Flags didn't stop there. Theming seemed to also be another top priority for this big transformation, and the theming starts as soon as the riders enter the queue. Once in the queue, it becomes apparent that a cyclone with strong force winds has come through the area. It even appears that storm chasers chasing the storm have crashed their vehicle. There's a boathouse with a big buoy and several other props strewn about the ride, such as an actual plane and boat. As riders proceed into the queue, there are also multiple monitors set up that give riders the backstory to what is actually happening.
I'm here at the Chase Command Center with the founder of Cyclone Hunters and Storm Enthusiast, Dr. Alan Cobb. Dr. Cobb, can you tell us what happened here?
As you can see, the storm touched progression of the storm and are in need of more recruits. Early indications show intense cyclonic energy, which has the potential to create a wicked cyclone. The necessity for more recruits is more critical than ever.
And where should interested candidates go?
Newscasters on the scene, along with weathermen, are tracking what is going on. And it's played out very nicely through this elaborate backstory seen within the Rides Q video. This backstory on the video creates a pre-show-like presence while riders wait in line to ride. Between the props and the pre-show video, riders waiting in the line can definitely get a more immersive feeling before they even get on the ride.
Was awesome. That was definitely one of the best coasters I've been on, and I can see why everyone's raving about this for this year, because this thing hauls. It is amazing, and it just never lets up. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, it's super fast, has extreme airtime. Those outward bank airtime hills are crazy. It's an awesome experience and definitely one of my top coasters.
It just does not let up the entire time. It's amazing. So you all have to head out to Six Flags New England here in Agawam, Mass, and you have to brave the storm. Wicked Cyclone. It's where it's at for 2015.
The Six Flags Media Day presentation that was given for Wicked Cyclone gives us a more in-depth look at what riders can expect to see and feel when they ride this new coaster.
So right now you can actually see we have a boat. You'll see that kind of crashed in an area. There's a plane, and we're trying our darndest to have that fog and steam coming out of that as well. There's going to be lights. There are going to be elements into these specific different design elements that will really enhance it with lights and fog and different concepts like that. So there's a little bit more of the close-up of the boat and the plane, where the attraction will actually run right through. It's almost going to be a part of this storm that came through, and you are on the ride and a part of it as you're being whipped, turned, going upside down, and having all of those extreme elements that Wicked Cyclone's going to provide. Then, with every storm, there's storm chasers, and those storm chasers crash during their journey on the Wicked Cyclone, and as you're going through the ride, you're going to see their satellite truck right there that has sadly crashed and is now, again, smoking, lights going through. And it's going to be a story throughout Wicked Cyclone, more than just a ride. It's that immersive experience that's thematic throughout the entire duration. Here's a little bit of the station area, and it's going to be a boathouse right along where the storm took place. Again, a reason why the boat is within the infields of the attraction. The storm came through, and it's going to be just really immersive in regards to the experience.
Although not open with the Six Flags rebranding in 2000, Pandemonium, a roller coaster which opened several years later in 2005, provided riders with a unique spin, pun intended. Not only would riders travel up and down hills at around 30 miles per hour over 90 seconds of track, the coaster cars they were in would spin 360 degrees around, and depending on the total combined weight of all 4 passengers in each car, that would determine the amount of spin. A unique coaster experience with, well, a twist. A fun fact, this coaster was built around another older ride called the Time Warp, which sent riders into the air circling around at 360 degrees. time warp was eventually removed, and the inner area where it once stood was replaced with some landscaping. A brand new kiddie ride area of the park was also located at the north end section. Its name, Looney Tunes Movie Town. Originally named Star Toon Studios the year before, it was renamed, and its theming was that of a movie studio in its backlot. Although this movie studio was done up from a kid's perspective. As park guests enter through the movie studio gate facade, they're met with several rides, a kids show themed to Looney Tunes, and a large dining option that acted as the studio lot commissary. On the front side of the commissary, several quick service dining options are also made available. On a quick side note, this Coney Island dining option that used to be here complemented the Skyride, as the Skyride's cable cars above were originally from Coney Island, as mentioned earlier. One of the attractions here was a roller coaster named the Great Chase. Known previously as Rolling Thunder from 1996 to 1999, this was a kid-sized coaster which had replaced one of Riverside's longtime kiddie coasters, Ricky's Little Twister. This new coaster was similar to the Little Twister, as the ride track was very low to the ground, provided a very small lift hill, and was of much shorter length compared to a full-blown roller coaster at around 30 seconds long. The next area we'll venture into is a small New England fishing village. This is where the Shipwreck Falls water ride that we mentioned a bit earlier was located. The ride itself provided great theming and atmosphere. However, the theming didn't stop there. The area around the ride had nautical themed atmosphere which resembled a small New England fishing village. Even the carnival games here got the nautical theming treatment. All of this made for another immersive area to explore. As part of this area's theming, the Wharf Caricature Company allows park guests to get their caricature done. It could be found right in front of the Shipwreck Falls ride docks. Various caricature artwork could also be seen up on the walls. In 2011, Shipwreck Falls had its last splashdowns as it was closed to make way for Goliath, a new steel coaster that would open in its place in the 2012 season. To accomplish that, the area needed to be filled in as it was mostly water from its Shipwreck Falls attraction. This was one of the first times that this area would see a dry land attraction, as its predecessors have all been water rides, starting with the Jungle Land Cruise and all the way up to the Pirates Cove and Lazy River attractions. The actual boathouse station platform from Shipwreck Falls was reused as Goliath's loading station platform and rearranged to a different spot within the attraction to fit the Goliath coaster's footprint. The actual entrance to Goliath was rerouted to the Crack Axle Canyon Western Town section, which was just on the other side of the New England Fishing Village section. If Riverside's monorail provided guests a round trip down to the south end of the park, then it was Riverside's Swiss Skyride that took its riders down to the north end of the park. However, with all the new nautical retheming, the once non-themed square open building of the Swiss Skyride would now come to life in this beautifully themed fishing market facade, and the name of the Skyride would change to the New England Skyway. The Skyway still utilized the same round cable car gondolas that were brought to the park from Coney Island back in the early 1970s. At some point in time, the round-shaped cars that were once gray in color were now painted purple. The New England Skyway was always a popular family ride overlooking the park. It was very scenic in nature, and although, like most sky rides, it moved along slowly, it allowed riders to rest their feet from a day of walking around the park. Departing the New England Fishing Village station had great views of Shipwreck Falls and the surrounding areas. As the ride progressed, more of the north end of the park, featuring the Cyclone Coaster, amongst other rides in the area, could be seen as well. The north end station was the unloading platform to where riders could get off and continue enjoying the rides and attractions around that area of the park. The Skyway did, however, make a complete round trip back to the New England Fishing Village station, so riders could also start their Skyway journey in the north end of the park and get off at the New England Fishing Village station. A commemorative plaque at the ride told the story of how the Skyway started out prior to its installation at the park back in 1973. It also highlighted its manufacturer, Von Roll, one of the leading manufacturers of these tramways. In 2014, however, the New England Skyway was closed down. The actual station platforms at both ends of the ride were kept up, one being in the New England Fishing Village area and the other in front of the Cyclone Coaster at the north end of the park. Since both stations had outer facades that were themed to the respective areas they were in, there didn't seem to be a need to remove them, as they fit in well and could be utilized for other things. The New England Skyway may have been gone from the park. However, a new ride, the New England Sky Screamer, would arrive that same year in 2014. Riders could soar through the sky at an elevation of 400 feet, rotating around at a speed of 35 miles per hour. A very thrilling sensation, to say the least, with great views of the park and beyond, and a very popular addition to the park. Now let's head back in time to the 1950s. Our destination, Rockville. As suggested by the sign as you enter this section of the park, Rockville seems to be a great place to live and work. As you begin to stroll the vintage streets of Rockville, 1950s flair is done up well. Those remembering this area from Riverside Park days will definitely be able to see what Six Flags did to implement a 50s theme to the buildings and its surrounding atmosphere. Rockville is home to many of the theme park's carnival-style games. As park guests walk around this area, they will notice the streets here are lined with these types of games. Many of the games seen here are nicely housed within 50s-style themed buildings. Close attention is paid to even the fonts and lettering. There is a couple of rides here, along with some dining options that are nicely themed to the 1950s. There's also a theater here, which was originally themed to a 1950s-style school gymnasium. However, it was eventually transformed to the Rockville Theater. Various shows can be seen here from time to time. Everything from magician shows, music reviews, and for Six Flags Halloween events, themed Halloween shows are also performed here. A fun fact about the theater's building: it was built in the same location to where Riverside Park's carousel once stood. Or, as seen on this 1980s park map of Riverside, it was called the merry-go-round, which is also another name used for this type of ride. In addition, the monorail's path would wrap around the building to complete its circle back to the monorail station. The area circled here in orange makes up this themed section of the park. The little area to the back, circled in blue, which offers a way to the park's first aid building, was once the main entrance to the water park, Island Kingdom. Also, we mentioned this area of the park earlier, as this is where the bumper cars were located within Riverside's kiddie ride section many years back. The Contiki ride, seen here, noted by the round beige dome, was once home to a kiddie car ride similar to Riverside's Route 66. However, it had much smaller cars on its track. Contiki, which opened up in 1999, is a Polynesian-themed ride complete with a thatched roof. Tiki, palms, and bamboo elements round out its theming. As this area is accessed through the Rockville section, it seems to be an area in between. The Contiki ride's theming is a great complement to the water park that is across the way. However, it also pays tribute to the 1950s rise of what was called Polynesian pop, or commonly referred to as Tiki. The connection between the park's Rockville 50s theming, along with the water park's theming, make it a great in-between the two sections type of attraction. Fast Eddie's Diner is just one of the great places guests could stop for quick service dining when in this area of the park. There are also other dining options here, and when the area first opened, a quick service Johnny Rockets was not too far from Fast Eddie's Diner, also within the Rockville section. However, for those who wanted to experience the 1950s atmosphere within an eat-in Johnny Rockets, they might have gone to our next section of the park for that experience. With the Riverside Park Speedway now gone, our next stop takes us back down to this area by the Connecticut River to explore a new section that opened with Six Flags in 2000. DC Superhero Adventures. This new area made great use of the land that was once Riverside's racetrack. Another elaborate and immersive theme section of the park, the DC Superhero Adventures area, had a little bit of everything for fans of all things DC. Once guests strolled down the big main ramp into the area, a variety of rides, attractions, games, gift shops, a show, and more dining options were available. One of those dining options, as we just mentioned, was Johnny Rockets. This was the park's large eat-in restaurant, and the building itself was decked out in Johnny Rockets flair. Across the way from Johnny Rockets, an indoor arcade could be found. And right next to that, the Daily Planet gift shop. This shop is at the exit of the Superman coaster. Speaking of the Superman coaster, it was one big, super-sized roller coaster. The coaster could literally be viewed at almost any point within the DC Superhero Adventures area. One of those areas, the entrance into the Superhero's Adventure. When guests enter the area under the main entrance arch, they are met with a curvy ramp down to the bottom of this section of the park. Along the way down the ramp, guests walk underneath the Superman coaster's ride tracks several times, and can see the coaster's trains zoom right by them, soaring above their heads and below through tunnels. As guests make their way down the ramp, more and more of this huge ride of steel is revealed. And there was a lot of steel that went into making this coaster. So much so, this park area's #1 attraction was named none other than Superman, Ride of Steel. This coaster by Intamin provides a 221-foot drop at speeds of around 77 miles per hour. When it opened with the park in May of 2000, it was known to be the longest and tallest coaster on the United States East Coast. Its track measures in at 5,400 feet long, and at 2 minutes and 10 seconds of ride time, riders can get a sense of flying high alongside the Connecticut River. As you can see from this aerial, Superman Ride of Steel is pretty big in size, especially when comparing it to other nearby coasters in the park. The queue line also has a unique feature. After entering the ride queue through a small themed building, riders then emerge back outside. From an aerial view, this portion of the queue is shaped like an S for Superman. Riders then enter another semi-enclosed area of the queue before boarding the coaster trains. In 2009, the coaster was renamed and rethemed to Bizarro. Bizarro was the fictional supervillain and antagonist to Superman. The coaster, which was once painted red and blue in its Superman days, was now repainted purple and blue to fit in with the Bizarro retheme. The Bizarro retheme lasted several years. However, in 2016, Superman would once again make a comeback, and its original paint scheme of red and blue would be implemented. The coaster's name itself was now Superman the Ride. From 2001 to 2015, Superman Ride of Steel and its Bizarro retheme had held on to the 2 top spots in the Golden Ticket Awards poll for top steel coasters, and continues to rank very high, as well as being voted the #1 steel coaster in 2006. To say the least, this Superman ride became very popular with coaster enthusiasts. One of the other attractions guests would see as they arrived at the bottom of the ramp into the DC area was the Batman Thrill Spectacular. Seen here in this aerial, the U-shaped blue canopy provided covering for the guest seating, and the show was performed directly in front of the guests with elaborate stunts and effects. The show had a presence in other Six Flags parks within the chain for a while. The show at Six Flags New England lasted from 2000 to 2006. After the show's closing, a new indoor coaster themed to Batman was scheduled to be built here. However, instead, it became home to the coaster Gotham City Gauntlet: Escape from Arkham Asylum. This new coaster was very similar to the one that would have been implemented on the indoor version. The coaster debuted at the park in 2011. The design is of a wild mouse configuration, providing several drops, twists, and turns. The theming is done well, and signs for Gotham City Transit can be seen as guests enter its queue line. Another smaller yet fun coaster in this section was Poison Ivy's Tangled Train. This was more of a family-friendly coaster with speeds of only 22 miles per hour. And it provided a great way for beginner coaster enthusiasts to experience a roller coaster that was more than a kid's coaster, yet milder than some of the extreme coasters, like its neighbor, Superman, which overshadowed the smaller coaster. At only 26 feet high, it was in a class of its own. Its train cars had some fun theming to them as well. It should be noted that, although this coaster has a speed of 22 miles per hour, don't let the speed itself fool you, as its many twists and turns provide a fun, thrilling ride for just about everyone, and is a fun and popular ride for many guests who dare get tangled. In 2007, the coaster was renamed to Catwoman's Whip, and then a slight name change to Catwoman Whip was implemented. The Joker's Wild Card, which also opened in 2000 in the Superhero Adventure area, gave riders some thrilling spins and more. The ride was an indoor attraction, and it took great advantage of this by adding lighting and effects to a ride that is usually found outdoors in some other parks. In 2005, the Joker's Wild Card no longer operated inside the building that it was originally housed in, and eventually, several years later, it too would find itself as an outdoor attraction. When the ride was moved outdoors, it replaced the Nightwing ride right next to the Superman coaster. Once outside, the Joker's Wild Card name resurfaced as the ride's name, however, it was eventually renamed to Kryptonite, then Kryptonite Collider, and a minor retheme, stripping away the Wild Card theming. The former Joker's Wild Card building itself became home to Justice League's Hall of Justice. This new indoor experience had guests enter the Justice League's lab, and it provided an elaborate themed interactive experience. Many gadgets and superhero equipment could be found inside. Guests could pose alongside their favorite characters for some cool photo opportunities. After many years at the park, the Hall of Justice would close its doors to make way for a new ride that was scheduled to open in 2019. That ride, Cyborg, Hyperdrive. The Hall of Justice theming was stripped away, and in its place, the building was rethemed to Star Laboratories. This attraction was set up with a great backstory. As riders entered Star Laboratories, its queue line acted as one of the lab rooms with high-tech visual screens and a great overall look and design, utilizing some great lighting to set the mood and atmosphere. As riders enter the next room in the lab, they are met with the ride itself, and the storyline continues with lighting, effects, and audio and visuals. Some may say the ride is reminiscent to the original Joker's Wildcard that also once resided within the very same building. However, on Cyborg Hyperdrive, all riders face outward rather than inward, and the in-depth theming and backstory of the new attraction is much more advanced overall versus the Joker's Wildcard. In 2020, the DC Superhero Adventures area was renamed DC Universe. A new ride scheduled to open in the area, Supergirl Skyflyer, would be installed where Kryptonite Collider used to be. DC Universe would now be neighbors to the area that once was referred to the south end of the park. However, in 2018, the south end was renamed and rethemed to Gotham City. Once an area with various rides and attractions like Chaos, Double Trouble, the Mine Racer roller coaster, Red River Rapids, and the Colossus Ferris wheel, the south end of the park played host to various rides and attractions over the years. Even though the selection of rides here were various in nature, after Six Flags New England opened in 2000, the south end of the park was starting to expand a bit, and as the years progressed, more and more rides would arrive here that would fit into the future retheme of Gotham City. Batman: The Dark Knight was one of them. On April 20th, 2002, this B&M roller coaster made its debut at the park. The coaster would be built on what was once part of Riverside's old parking lot area, which expanded the south end of the park just a bit. This was a great looking coaster with 2,600 feet of track, topping out at 118 feet high. With 5 inversions traveling at speeds of 55 miles per hour, Batman: The Dark Knight roller coaster was now in place at the south end of the park, which would eventually be joined with a full array of other rides themed to Gotham City. As years went on, several rides and attractions were taken out, and some new rides and attractions were installed. Both Chaos and Double Trouble, 2 rides that were there from the late 1990s Riverside, were both removed. Chaos in 2005 and Double Trouble in 2007. In the area of Chaos, a new building was built in its place that housed restrooms. The Colossus Ferris wheel took its last 150-foot high spin in 2005. It had been a park staple for a couple of decades, and it was replaced with the Gotham City Crime Wave. The Gotham City Crime Wave was actually a ride carried over from Riverside Park days. However, it was rethemed with the Gotham overlay and found its home in the south end section of the park across from Batman: The Dark Knight coaster. This was a Zamperla wave swinger, and it began operating at the park back in 1979. Back then, the ride was directly across from the International Plaza Food Court Dome, and many years later, it found its way over by the side of where the Thunderbolt coaster is located. Again, to keep with the Gotham theming, more rides were soon to be added to this area. One of them, the Joker 4D Free Fly coaster, opened with the park's 2017 season. This was a very unique coaster to the park, and guests would spin and tumble at around 38 miles per hour up and down and around the track.
I am the one and only Joker.
The Joker.
Of course! Isn't it great to see me? Ladies and gentlemen of Gotham City, today is your lucky day. Are you ready for some real fun? Oh, no. None of you are going anywhere. I have a dynamite idea that we can all have one last laugh together.
This has been years in the making and an epic ride in design and experience. What are you doing? Okay.
Batman has ruled this park for way too long, and it has been many years since I've been here.
3, 2, 1, go! All right, guys. Ladies and gentlemen, the Joker 4D Free Fly Coaster is now open. This is the 13th coaster here at Six Flags New England, utilizing magnetic technology and cutting-edge innovation in coaster experiences.
The area that the Joker was installed on was not always as dry as it seems. In fact, this area of the park had a couple of fun water rides in it since the late 1970s. Originally, it was home to Riverside Park's Red River Rapids, which opened in 1979 and was one of Riverside Park's popular log flume rides in the 1980s and 90s. After many years of being known as the Red River Rapids, the name was eventually changed to Poland Spring Plunge. In 2005, though, after roughly 26 years in operation, a new water ride was set to open. Splash Waterfalls made its debut for the 2006 season. As the sign stated, this was a family raft ride. The loading platform building and its surrounding areas were themed really well. It was set up as Splash Waterfalls Logging Company and Mill, with a real working water wheel that went around. This water attraction, though, didn't send its riders up a lift hill in a log this time. Instead, riders were sent up the hill in large tube-type rafts. The sides of the tubular raft were fairly tall, thus not getting riders too wet. However, the ride itself was pretty fun. As riders descended down the twisted circular slide, the raft itself would continuously spin on top of the slide's water until the raft hit the bottom, but not before going down 2 small slope drops, which then emptied out into the river-like setting and back into the platform station. The ride spent 10 fun years at Six Flags New England, and in 2016 it was announced that it would close forever, and in its place, the Joker coaster would make its way to the site for the 2017 season. This as well ended more than 2 decades of water rides in this section. With the ever-expanding water park adjacent to the Gotham City area, the need for water rides within the park was becoming less and less a priority. In fact, eventually to get to the water park guests would have to walk through Gotham City to get there. The Mine Eraser roller coaster had been a park staple ever since the 1997 season, with Premier Park serving as new owners when they purchased the park the year before in 1996. In 2018, in order to keep with the Gotham City theming, the Mine Eraser was renamed and rethemed to the Riddler Revenge. The coaster's original red track and teal-colored support beams were repainted as well, with the track now painted a vivid green color with bright yellow support beams. Also in 2018, Harley Quinn's Spinsanity opened as well. The ride speaks for itself to what it does. Spinsanity was built on the former grounds of where the teacups were located. To make way for this new ride, the teacups were relocated just steps away, closer to the Rockville section, in the area where the Buzzsaw ride once was located. The Buzzsaw ride was also another ride held over from the Riverside days. Back in those days, however, Buzzsaw was called Slingshot. Next up, the kiddie ride sections of the park. Riverside had 2 kid areas, one in the north end and the other in the south end of the park. When Six Flags New England opened, there were still 2 kid areas on both sides of the park, one of which we took a look at a bit earlier, known as Looney Tunes Movie Town, located in the north end. In 1999, prior to the Six Flags New England grand opening, the kid area in the south end was called Paul Bunyan's Buzzsaw Company. Here, as mentioned in this 1999 park map of Riverside, this area was a multi-level playground with more than 35 interactive gadgets that kids could explore. This was also the same area that the Route 66 antique cars were located. Riverside guests might remember this area being the home to Riverside's mini golf and also their haunted house that was once known as Frankenstein's Castle. After Riverside became a Six Flags park, Paul Bunyan's Buzzsaw Company was known as Tiny Timber Town. It premiered as such in 2001. Several years later, in 2007, this area would be rethemed to Wiggles World, and several new rides were added at this time. In 2011, the Wiggles World theming was taken out, and eventually this kids area became Kidsopolis. Kidsopolis had a nice selection of rides, dining options, and shows for the kids. In 2015, Route 66 was rethemed to a wild safari ride adventure known as Wild Wheels. It followed the same track layout as the previous Route 66 antique cars. However, this time around, the themed safari car's track direction, to which they traveled, was reversed. As riders began their safari adventure, they would travel into the woodlands and be met by several animals of the jungle. Several signs marked what part of the jungle riders were entering. In 2007, the introduction of a new area themed as Thomastown was situated near the front entrance of the park. This area had a couple of Thomas the Tank rides. However, the main ride here was the Thomas the Tank train ride. Thomastown only lasted a couple of years till around 2010 and was eventually rethemed to Whistle Stop Park in 2013. The train ride that was once Thomas the Tank was now called the New England Express, and the train ride itself took its passengers on the same adventure it did as Thomas the Tank, minus the Thomas themed props. However, this was still a relaxing train ride and was landscaped well and even included a pond that the train would pass by along the way. As of 2019, Whistle Stop Park became a Six Flags members area. However, the New England Express train ride within it still operated. There is one more section of the park we will explore. Six Flags wouldn't be complete without it, and on a hot day, park guests wouldn't be able to do without it. And that is the massive water park at Six Flags. Starting out as Island Kingdom in the late 1990s Riverside days, this water park has continued to grow year after year with more rides and attractions. In 2003, Island Kingdom became Hurricane Harbor under the Six Flags brand. Over the years, it had expanded to the point that it eventually took up most of the old parking lot that Riverside once used for its guests to park in. That wasn't a problem though, because as we mentioned earlier, the parking lot was moved across the street, and a combination of trams and a footbridge over the street below was utilized to get park guests into the park just as fast as if they were to walk the old parking lot. The theming at Hurricane Harbor was lush and tropical. Guests arriving into the water park could feel as if they just stepped out of the theme park and onto a tropical island getaway. When the park first opened as Island Kingdom back in the late 1990s, the entrance into the water park was in a different location to where it was when it became Hurricane Harbor. Seen here is the original entrance and pathway into the Island Kingdom water park. The entrance was later moved once the water park expanded out into the old Riverside parking lot. And by the time Island Kingdom became Hurricane Harbor in 2003, the entrance was moved to this location. Park guests would travel through the south end, now known as Gotham City, and they would pass under the Batman coaster before they reached the water park's new main entrance. The old Island Kingdom entrance was repurposed. From this aerial, the original Island Kingdom entrance path seems to still be there. However, it's now utilized as a path to a new water ride. An entrance to the first aid building did remain available to both the water park and theme park guests. Hurricane Harbor was beautifully landscaped. From the moment guests arrived at its new front entrance, palm trees and other tropical attributes filled the atmosphere. Themed buildings like the water park's restrooms were all themed very well and with great detail. No matter where guests would look, there just seemed to be more tropical atmosphere and amazing landscaping detail. Hurricane Harbor had several large beach-like pools that were massive in size, one being a wave pool. The theming around the wave pool was really cool. Old boats and a detailed nautical theme were present here. Cabanas could also be rented around this wave pool as well. Another beach-like pool had some fun bridges above it with thatched roof huts and some interactive water gadgets. A tiki bar could also be found around this area. Throughout the water park, there were many dining options. Each restaurant or quick serve establishment was also nicely themed to fit within its surrounding atmosphere. Shopping for water park type items was also not a problem, as there was a beach shop to get souvenirs and everything needed for a day at the water park. The actual water rides consisted of various water slides, a water coaster, along with other water-type attractions. There was always ample room for sunbathers and those wanting to just lounge around and not partake in any of the water park attractions. Guests could come early, grab a lounge chair, and have a relaxing day outside of the theme park's hustle and bustle. And as we mentioned before, with this level of fine detail and atmosphere, it could be kind of easy to just relax in this tropical oasis known as Hurricane Harbor. In wrapping up our historic journey of the park, there is one more attraction that we mentioned briefly earlier in the video, which we wanted to elaborate on a bit more, and for good reason. This attraction became a park staple throughout Riverside's history and had opened at the park back in 1941, a year after Riverside was reopened under new management and brought back to the public after falling on hard times in the 1930s. But did it survive the Six Flags New England era? And is it still there? As of this writing, the answer is yes. And the attraction? The roller coaster Thunderbolt. The oldest ride on the grounds of Six Flags New England is still continuing its ascent up its historic lift hill and giving coaster riders and enthusiasts that classic wooden coaster experience. If this coaster could talk, just imagine the amount of stories it could tell from its early days back to the 1940s till today. It would be quite a historic journey. As we mentioned, the coaster dates back to the very early years of when Ed Carroll Sr. purchased the park, and in fact, was Riverside's first roller coaster under Carroll's ownership. We touched upon how the Thunderbolt started its life as a Cyclone, opening back in 1941. It was built by Joseph E. Drambor from the purchase plans of the Cyclone that was featured at the 1939 World's Fair. The coaster was recognized by the American coaster enthusiasts with a commemorative plaque that was dedicated to the ride, citing it as an Ace roller coaster landmark. As the plaque reads, the Ace Roller Coaster Landmark is a designation reserved for rides of historic significance. It also gives some historic information about the coaster. This roller coaster provides its riders with that classic wooden coaster experience, and although by today's standards of lightning-fast super steel coasters, it's nice to have one of the original wooden coasters within the park for guests to enjoy, and that perhaps many of their families' previous generations had the opportunity to ride as well. The coaster saw a lot of attractions built in and around its footings over the decades. Everything from the El Dorado Mine Train, monorail station, Riverside Park Speedway, and other various attractions would call the Thunderbolt their neighbor within the park. They have now all come and gone, however, it would be the Thunderbolt that would still provide riders with its 2,600 feet of track and classic wooden coaster thrills that only the Thunderbolt could. Anyone lucky enough to ride this iconic coaster is experiencing a classic piece of history from a time that is gone but not forgotten, and Thunderbolt is that coaster. We have now come to the end of our historic journey and adventure back in time. We've seen and heard a lot about the park's long historic presence in Agawam, Massachusetts. Whether it was the picnic grove that started it all, or the amusement park it turned into, Riverside Park and Six Flags New England have a story to tell spanning well over a century and a half, dating back to the mid-1840s. It may be hard to believe a park could operate that long. However, as we have seen, the many evolutions, advancements in technology, and innovations over the course of time have allowed these park grounds to keep moving forward into the future, step by step, expanding upon its past history, and to become even more advanced than ever before. And even today, as Six Flags New England ventures further into its future, we will continue to see new technology, advancements, more rides and attractions to continue to grace these historic grounds. Whatever Six Flags New England has in store for future generations, we wanted to take a look back at what got us to this point in time. The objective of this documentary was to highlight some of the major milestones in the park's history, and even though we have managed to cover an immense amount of historic content in this video, there is still a plethora of historic information out there regarding the history of Riverside Park. As we have seen and heard in this video, there was a time before and after the Riverside Park days many of us might have remembered or experienced. One book we recommend picking up is author David Checky's Images of America, Riverside Park, from Arcadia Publishing. David's book gives an even more in-depth, detailed look into the park's history with many pictures and detailed information not found in this video. Special thanks to the various contributors that allowed their information, pictures, and videos to be featured in this documentary. A list of the contributors can be found under the special thanks section within the end credits. And if you're ever in Agawam, Massachusetts, and you're looking for action-packed theme park thrills, or just a relaxing day exploring a tropical water park setting, stop by Six Flags New England, and if you do, know that you're stepping into a very historic place and time, and maybe you too will want to explore the history of Riverside Park.